The harbor smelled of cinnamon and hot pitch as dawn stole in over the jade gates, and the silk-sailed ships that Zaro-Jean Daxos had promised her made a little forest of masts against the paling sky. Ropes creaked like tired bones. Lanterns glowed and guttered. Men with rings through their nipples and earrings of beaten gold moved like shadows over the decks, bare feet, whispering along planks that had known more spice and silk than salt. And Daenerys watched the city she had never come to love begin to recede even before a single line was cast off. Qarth had taught her too much. In its painted halls and perfumed gardens, she had learned that beauty could hide a void, that laughter could be hollow as an empty vault, and that kindness wore masks as easily as cruelty. The 13 had smiled as they weighed her worth like amber on a balance. The pureborn had praised her lineage while sneering at her hunger, and the warlocks had offered visions so bright they burned. Dany had stood under the black-boughed trees and stepped through their cold blue doors and listened to the whispers that promised and threatened in one breath. She had come away with the taste of ashes and the knowledge that she could not stay in any place where others measured out her future with teaspoons of courtesy and debt. Now Xaro stood to her left beneath a scarlet awning, a tower of scented silks and sighs. His eyelids shined with oil, two long fingers stroking the black fork of his beard. A wedding, he had told her with that languid smile of his, is not always a chain. Sometimes it is only a silk ribbon, and silk can be slipped. The bells of Qarth were tolling distantly for some festival or another. The Qartheen loved to toll bells. The sound came like water poured from high bowls, bright and mocking. The world smelled of cinnamon and hot pitch, and Dany did not answer Xaro yet. She lifted her hand and felt the dawn breeze move across her palm, and she thought of Pentos and a man with rings on his fingers, and a laughter like a rolling summer storm. Khaleesi. Jorah Mormont's voice, rough as worn leather. He had come quietly, as always he came. If a bear could ever be said to come quietly. His hair had gone thin at the crown. The sea wind pressed it this way and that. His arms were square and thick and scarred where the sun darkened them. The tide turns. The captains say it is time. Her dragons felt it too. Drogon had woken just before first light, as he always did, opening his dark wings like the pages of a burnt book, tasting the breeze with a forked black tongue. Victarion coiled himself in the curve of the mast half the night, his pale gold hide gleaming like a spill of cider, while Rhaegal had taken a length of rope for an enemy and shredded it to fragrant hair. The sailors had gaped and crossed themselves in a dozen gods' names and spat over their shoulders. And one man had cut a little bit from his own earlobe and tossed it to the sea. The dragon's heat kept the dew from settling on the deck. "Let us go then," Dany said, and her breath came white for an instant in the dawn cool. She touched the rail. The wood was tacky with pitch. "Let us go home." A word that changed shape when she looked at it. Home had been a memory her brother wore like a crown, a word he beat against her shoulders when he was angry and pressed like a coin into her palm when he was soft. Home had been a red door that opened and opened again in Pentos, a courtyard lemon tree and a tile roof warm with sun. Home had been a tent warm with horse sweat and sweet milk, a man with hair like midnight spilling through his fingers and a child quickening that had been snatched away. Home had been 3 eggs crusted with salt and stone that cracked like a world. Home was now the song inside the dragons when they slept against her, the reaching flame within her. She could not say whether Pentos was home or not, but it lay across the narrow sea from the place that was, and for that, the word clung to it like salt to skin. Xaro offered a smooth white hand. "My wife," he said, sotto voce, so that only she would hear it. "Come, the captains await the blessing." She looked down at his hand and then up past it, to where the harbor gates rose in their stone severity. "Wife, a silk ribbon," he had said, "and a wedding a bargain like any other." The marriage singers had murmured in their silver masks and sprinkled powdered jade on their heads, and Dany had stood apart as the Qartheen recited their pretty lies to one another. She had not taken his hand then, and she did not take it now. "If you will bless them," she said, "bless them for the wind, and bless me for the storm." Xaro's laugh was a little breath, perfume, and pride. "Storms are for men of iron," he murmured. "I have never liked to be wet." "Then keep inside," Jorah said curtly, And when Xaro's chin dipped, the big man did not bother to hide the way his mouth tightened. The lines were cast off. Long poles nudged them from the pier, and the barge captains shouted, and the oars dipped as if to taste the water first, and then they bit into it in earnest. The silk sails unfurled, indigo, bone, saffron, and took the breeze with a snap. The ship named the Veil of Summer led the fleet, her prow shaped like a woman with a high-lifted chin and hair flowing back into curls of painted foam. Dany stood forward as the hull groaned, as the sea shrugged them into its green arms with all the careless strength of a giant. The light came down like spilled wine, red and then gold, and Korth began to dwindle into a painted box of a city. Its high walls, like the edge of a lacquered bowl. Irri and Jikwi clung together below the awning, both tense with the seas shifting. Irri's brown eyes, long-lashed, darted from the rigging to the far-off bright line of the horizon, and Jikwi was murmuring swift little prayers in Dothraki under her breath. "The water is a false road," she kept saying. "The water eats horses. The water eats men. And then the water carries queens," Dany said, and she said it as gently as she knew how, even if it made something sharp and stubborn inside her stand taller. She touched Jikki's cheek. "I will not let the water eat you." She would not. She would put a whip to the sea if it tried. The thought made her smile. By noon, the harbor was a smudge, and the talk became the sea's talk. Sails and wind and soundings, currents and birds. Dany learned the names without realizing she had learned them, for they slid around her like foam, and she caught them and kept them as if she were snatching little silver fishes. The jade gates were a green width opening into a bluer, wider, emptier world, and the wind swung steady out of the east, and the Qartheen captains seemed content. The sea lifted and settled, and for a while Dany felt as if she walked, not sailed, on something that could not decide if it was stone or breath. Her stomach made its own uncertain peace. Drogon took to the air when the sun was high, arcing over the ship with his shadow cutting across the deck like a black blade. Some of the sailors ducked without thinking. Others stared, and then remembered to look away. Xaro did not look up at all. He kept his hands folded over his belly and talked politics in that lazy, water-soft voice, while the spray flecked his lashes. "Pentos," he said, his smile the same length as always. "Pentos is not a city. Pentos is a market. When markets thrive, princes smile. When markets fail, princes bleed. They have a fondness for making their failures bleed with them. The Prince of Pentos bleeds most of all. Illyrio Mopatis is a man who has learned how to make others hemorrhage coin while he collects the bandage trades. Clever, clever, oh so clever, and with a kitchen for a heart. He is your friend, it is said. I would count my rings after he embraces me. Then. Illyrio has given me much," Dany said, though the truth of that felt like a rope with two ends. He had bought the house with the red door. He had brought Khal Drogo to look at her as a man might look at a horse. He had given her 3 eggs that were stone and not stone and full of worlds. He had sent ships now, if Xaro was to be believed. And even if these sails bore Qartheen dye and Qartheen knots, Illyrio's hand lay on everything like a shadow. He is a friend. Friends who say friend, Xaro mused, are often friends as long as the word lasts in the mouth. He put his hand over his mouth briefly, as if the word might try to escape, and laughed. "We will dine together with him, and you will see. The food will be very fine. The man eats like a king. He will feed your dragons saved sheep, and saved princes, and then ask for a song as his payment. And he will give us a roof and bread," Jorah said. "And that is more than might be got in Volantis or Lys with 3 dragons and a Dothraki." He nodded past the sails to the long pale arc of the coast that slid on their right hand like a patient beast. "The storms come hard around the Saffron Straits. There are corsairs near the Basilisk Isles who'd sell their mothers for a clutch of eggs and their fathers for a whiff of dragonfire. Pentos is nearer and safer than any place west. Nearer to Westeros. Oh, nearer to where she must go." The thought came not like a bell, but like a breath drawn deep. Dany moved her hand across the rail, where the pitch warmed under the sun, and she felt the way the hull spoke to the water and the water answered. And it seemed to her that the sea was a chest that rose and fell, the sky its lid. She looked out where the sky and water met and thought of the narrow sea. And then, and only then, did fear touch her. The sea between worlds. The water that had kept her away all her life. It would not keep her much longer. On the second night, the wind went uneasy at sunset, shifting and gusting, and the halyards hummed, and men looked at the sky. A bank of cloud arrived like an army at the horizon's edge, without banners. At supper, under the awning, flatbreads brushed with oil and salt. Dee remembered the taste of sweet horse's heart and the copper of blood, and wanted something simpler. She ate a single date and fed the rest to Victarion and Rhaegal, one each, neat as a mother with sweetmeats for children. Drogon did not come for them. He watched instead, his eyes made of embers, his head canted slightly, as if the word for hunger were something men said, but dragons did not need to. "Storm," said the first mate the next morning, flat and certain, as if the word itself were a piece of rope they would need. The wind veered, and then it swung, and then it roared. The green of the sea went black as a bruise in places, and then shone silver like a coin at others. So quickly Dany's breath could not keep pace with her sight. She was not afraid. She was not. But the ships made a sound through their bones, like something small being ground in a mortar, and she felt that in her own bones. The storm came like a command unanswered too long. Men swarmed up the rigging, which became ladders made of rain. Sailors shouted into the wind and heard only half their words as the other halves shattered and flew away like wet birds. The silk sails snapped, bellied, strained, were reefed and shaken out again, reefed again. The world dwindled to the deck where she stood braced with her feet set wide. Jorah's hand near her back, not quite touching, to Xaro's glistening face gone dull as stone, to Irri crouched with her head wrapped in her scarf and Jicky's knuckles white with her grip on the awning pole. Dany laughed once when the deck slewed, and the laugh was snatched from her mouth and tossed into the air and came down as rain. She could taste pitch and salt. Her hair clung to her face like weed. Drogon rose into the storm with a scream. For a heartbeat the world was cracking dark and white, and then a wedge of blackness leaped up into the broken light. Wings spread, and his cry split the storm's mouth. Dany found herself roaring with him, soundless. Drogon turned over the ship once and then again, carving arcs out of the rain. Lightning wrote its brief letters across the belly of the clouds and vanished before anyone could learn the words. Rhaegal tried to follow him. He beat up into the rain, green on black, and the wind knocked him sideways. Victarion clung to the mast's foot, his talons scoring grooves in the pitch. Dany did not think. She moved, and Jorah swore and caught her and then let her go because he always let her go when she moved like that. She was on the ladder and up 3 steps and then 5, and the rain was a fist that wanted to push her back into herself. And she said no, and when she said it, the word was only hers, and it was huge. She wrapped her left arm around the mast and reached for Rhaegal with her right palm open. He snapped at her, not unkindly, a warning, and then pressed his hot snout against her wrist. His skin was small, hard plates under silk. He was flame turned animal, wait and want. "Down," she told him. "Down, sweetling." Her voice could not travel, but her hand could, and her mind did perhaps. He folded into himself like an ember closing and slid down the ladder in ungainly haste, and she was below, and the deck leapt, and she went with it. Afterward, the rain had a different taste. The storm ran like a wild horse runs, until its lungs had nothing left in them. But unlike a horse, it did not falter at the end. It simply ceased to be, and the sea lay down like a tired dog. The sky opened its pale eye, and men laughed with emptiness in the laughter, and then began to work as if nothing had happened. The silk sails were furled and then shaken out to dry. Someone sang, very low, a song about a girl who loved the sea, and was loved by it in turn until she discovered what loving meant. Dany leaned against the mast and let her hair drip. When Drogon returned, he stank of lightning. He folded himself into the curve of her body as if she had always been a cliff, and he a piece of storm that belonged behind it. That night, when the water shone with foxfire and little silver fish briefly painted their bodies in light under the hull, and then vanished again, Dany slept a half-sleep with her eyes half open and dreamed the way the sea dreams, long and slow and full of shapes, that might be islands and might be whales and might be gods. In her dream, a woman stood across the deck from her in a mask of red lacquer carved with tears. The woman's eyes were moons, and her hands were full of glass. "To go north you must go south," said the masked woman, "for dreams are unafraid of foolishness. To reach the light, you must pass beneath the shadow. To go forward, you must go back." "I am going back," Dany said. Or she thought she said it, and the sea translated. The masked woman's tears gleamed like grease. "You are going toward. Back is a word men make. You do not go back. The road remakes itself behind you. The door you passed through is no longer the same door." "Words," Dany said. Drogon's breath warmed her thigh through her skirt. "Bring me something that is not made of words." The masked woman turned her hands, and in them were two flames, one pale and one dark. The pale flame was a ship with a bright painted belly. The dark flame dawned at her like a boy's face that was not a boy's. "The mummer's child," the woman said, and perhaps she smiled beneath the mask because her voice made the idea kinder. "The lion's debt, the kraken's hunger, the dark flame, the pale mare, the beast that is city, and the city that is beast. You are the mother of dragons. That is not the same as being mother to men." Dany's fingers curled against the deck. She had not known she was ready for anger until it stood next to her and slipped its arm in hers. "I will be what I choose," she said, and the dream listened, and even the foxfire lightened in the water as if to hear better. "I will be fire and home and bread and the whip in the river's hand. I will choose." The masked woman's hands emptied. The tears on her mask had stopped. "Then remember this, child. Cups are filled for a reason. Ask why before you drink." Dany woke with her cheek stuck to the plank and Drogon's tail lying across her ankle. The stars were very sharp. She could taste rain that had fallen 3 hours ago. They saw no land for 7 days after that, only birds that came to rest on the rigging and left white gifts of themselves behind, and a floating log webbed with weed that when men hauled it close with a hook, scattered with little crabs. Irie's stomach learned the sea slowly. Jiki refused to learn it at all and lived on clove tea and stubbornness. Xaro played at Savas with a captain who thought he could hide his boredom and could not, and Jorah watched the board as if he could rearrange the world with it. Dany took the black dragon on her knee and traced the little knobs of his spine, one by one, down to the tail, which lashed of its own will. "Will they fear me in Pentos?" she asked, and Drogon lifted his head as if the question were meat. "They will fear your dragons," Jorah said. "And they will fear what the dragons mean. They will count meanings as they count coin. Illyrio will weigh the best of them in his napkin, as if it were a plum." "Menno, do you mean to put me in a bowl and set me down in front of a guest?" Dany asked lightly, and Jorah's mouth moved in the way it always moved when she made him smile, and he fought the smile with all the armor he owned. "You're not a plum. You're the knife the fruit remembers," he said, and then the smile came a little anyway, and that was enough. At dawn on the 13th day, a faint brown line appeared, so thin that for a while Dany thought it was a cut in the sky. It grew thicker as they watched it, and it lengthened, and then the line became city, and the city became chimney smoke and domes, and the sharp blue wink of tiles, and the brown-gray of walls. The sailors began to talk differently. The words that came into their mouths had street names on them. For hours the city did not appear to come nearer, and then all at once it did, like a man you have been watching from far away who lifts his hand and makes your name with his fingers. Pentos. She knew it before Jorah told her, the way a swallow knows its eaves. The harbor opened wide like two hands held out to receive coins. The ships slid in among other ships, past quays where men with their hair in oiled braids yelled in the harsh Pentoshi way at other men with hunched shoulders. The air tasted of fish and yeast, and somewhere far inland it tasted of wheat and dust. There were domes glazed like olives and roofs tiled blue and green and ochre. A bell was ringing, not a Carthene bell that suggested gods were porcelain dolls, but a practical bell that wanted men to move faster. The tide made a thick sound as it zested itself against the pilings. "Home," Jiki whispered, and then shook her head as if to ask who had put that word in her mouth. Irri looked away from the horses being led down a gangplank at another berth and pretended she had not been counting them. A magister came down to meet them with a parasol as blue as a robin's egg and a robe the color of bruised plums. His bearers were tall men with smooth cheeks and the eyes of boys who had learned not to look at women. He bowed to Xaro first, which pleased Xaro, and then he bowed to Dany longer, which pleased Xaro less. "Princess," the magister said in Valyrian that was old and careful, and flawed at the edges, like porcelain that had been mended too often. "Princess of Dragonstone, breaker of," he faltered. His smile was damp. "Welcome to Pentos. Welcome to the manse of Illyrio Mopatis, where cool rooms and hot food await." "Does he sleep in a cool room?" Xaro asked conversationally. It would be cruel if he did not. The magister smiled, as if he had not heard. "Carriages," he said to no one in particular, but carriages appeared anyway. High-wheeled, lacquered, the interiors lined with pale silk that would be spoiled within days and replaced without thought. Dany did not mount the first carriage. She let Xaro climb in, the parasol tilting like a blue coin over his head, and followed Jorah into the second, with Irri and Jiki braced opposite to watch the city move. It moved all right. Pentos existed at 4 heights at once, up in the domes where the sun stuck and rolled, at the street's middle where men and carts and dogs and children made a river of themselves. Under that at the damp edge of the gutters, where things more enduring than men's names went by, and below even that in the cellars where wine slept. The carriages rattled over paving stones and slowed for markets where fish gaped and eyes argued. Dany kept the window's silk curtain swept back with 2 fingers and leaned her cheek against the frame. She noticed the chalk numbers scrawled beside certain doorways. She saw the latticework shadow of a balcony across a girl's face as she looked down. She saw a fruit seller lift a plum to the light to inspect it, as if the sun could tell him lies from truths. Illyrio's manse stood behind walls like butter. Its gate was iron in the shape of leaves and masks, and a fountain laughed just beyond. Peacocks strutted in the shade, as if they had built the place, and the men in it merely rented. Dany stepped down and the air came cool at once, so different from the harbor stink she could feel the sweat dry at her temples. Men with bare feet and belts of scarlet cloth appeared the way thoughts appear, quietly and without fuss, and offered trays of water that looked like milk and tasted of a flower she could not name and a sweet meat that stuck in the teeth. Jorah refused the water. Xaro drank it with delicate relish and asked for more. Irri took a sip without being asked and wrinkled her nose. There he was. He came into the courtyard like a ship comes into harbor, full and self-assured, and making small men get out of his way. Rings like little suns on each hand, beard forked and oiled and precise, eyes the wet brown of dates. His tunic was a yellow that should not have worked on a man like him, and somehow did. Lavish at the sides, and drawn in to display his wealth like a bruise. He smiled. There was nothing timid in the smile. "My little princess," Illyrio Mopatis said, and it was a new sound, different from the old sound in memory. He came to her with his arms open, and Dany did not step back. She let him kiss her cheeks the way uncles do when the crowd watches. He smelled of cinnamon and clean sweat and something animal, something you could only hide if you lived alone. "Magister," she said. Her voice was steady. "You have my thanks." "I have your gratitude," Illyrio replied, "and I have the honor of your presence. They are not the same coin, but both spend beautifully." He turned to Jorah with an ease that suggested more than one language. "Sir Bear," he said, as if the jape were old and had been polished by use. "Welcome back to my cellars." "I hope not to your cells," Jorah said without quite smiling. "My thanks for your hospitality." "You will have hospitality until my cooks run out of chickens," Illyrio said cheerfully. "And the day my cooks run out of chickens is the day the sun finds the bottom of the sea." He looked past them, at Xaro, and his smile lost a little of its gloss. "Karth," he said in a voice that spoiled the word like milk. "Illyrio," Xaro replied, and his lids dropped very slightly. "I have brought you a queen. You may later bring me wine." "Memin." "Wine I will bring," Illyrio said, clapping his hands. "And everything else I can bring, because she is my guest, and because I am a generous man, and because I would like to keep living." He looked at Dany again, and the look changed while she watched it, like a fish in a bowl turning and catching the light differently with each pass. "Come, eat. Speak to me of the sea. Tell me how your dragons fly. Tell me what hunger their fires have." "Banin?" They went inward through rooms that smelled of lemon and new bread, into other rooms that smelled of old books and polished cedar, and then into a garden that pulled the day down over it, like a blanket, and made cool. There were lilies like white mouths and orange trees with fruit like small suns, and a long pool with green tile, where fish that might have been coins turned themselves into fish and back again. Dany breathed and felt the house breathe with her. "Pentos is a market," Xaro had said. Illyrio had made himself a temple within the market, and he was the god and the acolyte both. They fed her too much. She ate too little. The meats were all too tender, the wine too sweet. She found herself watching Illyrio's fingers as he spoke, rings nestling against rings, fat pressing against metal. He spoke of the Triarchs in Volantis, and of how the orange wanted to paint stripes upon the black, of how the green had a new whore, of Lys, which pretended it was a woman and was only a room, of Tyrosh and its dyes, of Bravos, which had no kind word for dragons, and less for those who claimed them. He spoke of Westeros as if it were a boat grown old, and leaking, and patched so often with wrong wood, that no one could remember the first plank. He did not say the names that meant most, Robert, Cersei, Lannister, Stark, but they stood somewhere behind his teeth, perhaps waiting to be traded. "And you," Illyrio said at last, with all the weight a man like him could give to a pronoun, "my little princess. You have brought the world a story. It is time the world repaid you a coin or two for it." "I have brought dragons," Dany said. He made a pleased noise that tasted of honey. "You have indeed. And brought myself," she added. There was a heartbeat where he looked at her as if the word were new, and he might want to learn how to cook it. Then Illyrio spread his hands and the rings flashed. "You are here," he said. "You are safe. You are near to the place we spoke of, in another life. I have kept rooms for you. I have kept a bed for you. I have kept something else as well." "Oh." Yora's chair creaked as he shifted. Xaro lifted his goblet and studied the wine as if it might read him a future. Dany's skin cooled along her arms. "Kept," she repeated. "We spoke, after your brother's shining reign came to its end, of a plan," Illyrio said. His voice was not oily, not now. He had less oil than a fish pulled from the water and laid on the marble. "A plan that required patience. Your marriage to Drogo was one of its stones. Stones sometimes sink. Stones sometimes float. I do not weep over stones. I choose others." "No." "And now?" Dany said. "And now the sea has given me back a stone," Illyrio said softly. "That was once thought lost. The tide brings such things. I have a boy in mind. Not the boy you might think. He is not a boy either, not where it matters. He has been forged the way swords are forged, with quenching and beating and quenching again. He has a name the world recognizes and does not expect to hear." Dany had not meant to shiver. She felt it anyway, a rippling across the skin. She looked beyond Illyrio, through the shutter slat, where the light was a brighter green, and saw a servant pass with a platter of flatbread, and heard, or thought she heard, the city's long yawn, and somewhere a child laughed the way gulls laugh, sharp and hungry. Drogon stirred on his golden perch and opened his mouth in a silent yawn and showed all his little knife teeth. "I do not want a boy," she said, and her voice surprised her, for it was cool. "I want ships and swords and truth." "You shall have ships," Xaro murmured. "Swords are noisy and fall out of scabbards." Truth is a woman who charges too much for her kisses, but perhaps our generous friend has put coin aside for her. N. Illyrio's eyes half-lidded with pleased contempt. My kitchens, he said lightly, as if kitchens made kings. Ere well stocked. We will have time to speak of truth. It is not perishable, though men like to pretend it is. He leaned forward. Rest, princess. The city is a fog in summer and a knife in winter. Tonight it is neither. I will send musicians. Tomorrow we will walk in the gardens and talk of the narrow sea. Tomorrow, his voice warmed, we will talk of the boy I spoke of. He is not a boy, I promise you. But if the word makes you kinder, we will use another. Bender. I will walk alone, Dany said. And there was a space after the words that filled with Illyria's rings tapping at one another. As you wish, he said. In my house no one walks alone, however. The walls have ears, and the ears have sharp memories. It is better if my ears are among them. He clapped his hands. Belwas, he called, and from the colonnade a man came, round as a wine cask, belly oiled and shining, head bald as a melon, mustaches drooping like wet rope. Scars bloomed across him like flowers on a thorn bush. He thumped his fist to his chest. Belwas walks with little queen, he announced, with joy so vigorous it almost cured Dany of irritation. Big Belwas needs to walk, to make stomach small. He slapped the stomach fondly. Like kitten. Big Belwas also keeps away pickpockets, Illyrio added, eyes bland. And their knives. Go, my princess. Breathe my garden air. It is the best of our city. Bentau. Dany rose, not looking at Xaro, not looking at Jorah, and the dragons rose with her, for they were always rising when she rose, as if her movement drew flame after it, the way wood draws sparks. Belwas stumped along behind, breathing like a sleepful man. The tiles beneath her sandals were cool green, and then warm ochre, and then a blue so deep it tried to pull the eye down. Night had come while they had been eating. Pentos was a breath held by 1,000 sleeping mouths, and the garden had the feel of ships. Things tied and trimmed, the way leaves trimmed light, the way fountains tied sound to water. She walked beneath a trellis where grapevines curled their tendrils into arabesques, and then beyond into a narrow path edged with myrtle. Flowers she did not know gave off scents that changed with each step. There was a place where the air smelled of crushed mint, and she stood there and breathed until she could taste green on her tongue. Drogon hopped from her shoulder to the trellis and gave a little hiss at nothing, perhaps at the memory of rain, perhaps at the reflection of the moon in his own eyes. Pentos lay not far beyond the wall. She could sense it, the way you can sense a person outside a door you will open, or a river through trees. There was a window in the outer wall, where a lattice cut the world into diamond-shaped pieces, and through it Dany could see a sliver of street and a cat on a lintel, and the shadow of a woman with a pitcher on her head. The moon made everything more itself. Belwas made a low hum as he tested a fig with his thumb, and then ate it whole, skin and all, with an expression of perfect piety. Khaleesi, Jorah said from the courtyard door. He had not followed it once. He always gave her a little length of cord. Now he stepped into the green cool, and paused to let his eyes find her. He did not come too close. Yes, she said. He was thinking before he answered. She liked that about him, even when she did not like anything else. The Magister intends to bind you with promises, Jorah said. He will call it friendship. He will call it gratitude. He will call it your duty to your house and to your people. Every time you accept one of those words, you will be taking a link of a chain in your hand, and one day you will wake with a collar around your throat. He spread his hands, scar and callus and history on them. You asked me in Qarth if I thought we should go to Pentos. I thought then that the sea to Astapor was safer. I thought then that you would need soldiers before you needed dinners. I was wrong. The sea does what it wants, and so do the men on it. But I was not entirely wrong. Illyrio is a net. He is soft silk, but he is a net. Then, I have been a fish, Dany said. I have learned how to bite. Jorah's mouth did that almost smile again. Then bite where it hurts, he said. And do not swallow what you do not like the taste of. He shifted, as if the weight of something in his body sometimes had to be moved around to make breathing easier. There's another thing. He spoke of a boy. That is not a coin tossed by chance onto the table. Illyrio has had a plan in his head longer than many plans live. It would be like him to try and put your dragons in one scale and something else in the other. Dandy. Something else, Dany repeated. A boy with a name. A boy who is a sword and a story. Tell me what you think he means. Jorah looked past her to where the pool lay like a length of night, and in it the moon became a coin and unbecame it. There were whispers, in Pentos and Lys and Myr. Before you were wed, he said slowly. It was said that your nephew lived, that Rhaegar's son by Elia was spirited away by Varys Mummer's tricks. A dead babe laid in his place. A live one smuggled out like contraband. I did not believe it. I do not like to, even now. But if I were a spider, and I had a queen somewhere far off with 3 dragons and 2 little prudents, and here a boy with acclaim and tutors and patience, and here a sellsword company with old promises, and no honor but what they sell by the day, perhaps I would think to join my threads. Ben? Mummer's dragon, Dany whispered, and the words came from somewhere else. She remembered the masked woman's tears. She remembered cups, and remembered that they were filled for reasons. The garden pricked at her with the needles of its sense. If a child lives, she said, and the word child made something surprisingly tender inside her. Something with the taste of milk, move. If a man lives, say, a man with my brother's name in his mouth and not much else, what does that make me? You? Jorah said. It makes you fire. His gaze, when it fell from the pool to her, did not flinch. And it makes him kindling. Kindling burns. Dany turned her hand in the moonlight, watching the tendons shift under the skin, watching the silver hair on her arm lay itself down and rise again with a touch of breeze. Oh, do kingdoms. Then it is a queen's part to set what burns and what does not, Jorah said. And to be sure she does not set the wrong thing in her own house. He half bowed and went backward 2 steps, because he was sometimes careful of ceremony in a way that made her forgive him. I will leave you, my queen. The night is a better listener than I am. If you need me, I will be where I always am. Nan? Dawapran. Where is that? She asked, even though she knew. At the door, he said with no shame, and was gone, leaving Belwas to eat another fig in piety, and the dragons to settle themselves like live jewelry into the ivy's shadow. Dany stayed where she was until the moon moved off the pool, and the pool forgot it had ever been a coin. The city lay coiled outside like a creature that had breathed itself to sleep with difficulty and might wake angry. She thought of Illyrio and his well-stocked kitchens. She thought of Xaro and his silk ribbons. She thought of the water and ordered it, in her mind, not to eat anyone. She thought of a boy made of story, and a story made of need. When she finally turned back toward her rooms, the courtyards were quieter, but not empty. A slender man stood at the edge of the path, where the myrtle made a dark seam. He had a musician's hands, long, clever, and wore a mask of simple black velvet that meant nothing and everything. He bowed deeply without moving his eyes. Your pardon, princess, he said, and his voice had the lilt of Lys and the hush of Bravos, and the surety of some third place wound through it like a braid. A friend of a friend asked me to put a thought in your ear, since ears are coins in this house, and sometimes must be offered quickly, before others spend them. Speak, Dany said. Drogon flicked his tongue out, tasting the man from where he clung to the trellis. Belwas looked up with a fig seed on his lip, then went back to his work of devotion. The boy, said the masked man softly, and the word was a door pulled toward her, but not yet opened. If you meet him, do not look at his name first. Look at his scars. Look at his teachers. Ask who eats when he dines and who goes hungry. A mummer's dragon still breathes fire, but a mummer's dragon burns where he is told. But a mummer's dragon burns where he is told. Dany did not let her face tighten. Mask, she said, a touch of mockery, as she knew men preferred that sometimes to disdain, and riddles. Names, the man replied. are merely masks men are born wearing. Riddles are simply questions that have not yet agreed to be called by their answers. He bowed again and made to go. He is called bright where I have heard him called, he added, as if a kindness, and golden. But gold takes men's eyes. And mine? Dany asked. The man stopped. He tilted his head as if listening to glass. Yours are taken by fire, he said without any softness at all. And then he was gone among the leaves with a sound like a rat in the vines. Dany stood and watched the space where he had been, then glanced at Belwas to see if the world still existed. It did. Belwas bit into another fig and rumbled a wordless hymn. She reached up, and Drogon came to her hand at once, hot and weighty with his bones pressed into that light, scaled casing. His breath was the cleanest thing she knew. She pressed her cheek to his snout and felt the future pushing through his sharp little teeth. She did not sleep long. When she lay down, the sheet smelled of saffron and starch, and of a fat man's money. She dreamed of a boy with eyes of blue glass stone, but when she reached for him, he was only a plume of smoke, and when she blew on the smoke, it curled into a dragon that melted into her, and she woke with the room pinking at the edges and the sea somewhere speaking to itself. She rose and dressed without calling for Eerie, and when she stepped into the garden, the morning's birds were just beginning to critique the day. Pentos breathed differently in morning. Bakers laughed as if they had never had sorrow. Water sellers knocked their sticks together like improvised music. Jiki, when she found her, had a stubborn bowl of porridge and a face that said she would fight it to a standstill. Eerie's hair was already braided tightly, precise, the way she liked the world to be. Today, Dany said to no one and to both of them, I will see the city, not the parts that men show, the parts that men don't bring to tables. She did not wait for permission and did not ask for a guard. Belwas came anyway, faithful as a dog, noisier than one. Jorah tried to insist on a cloak for her, but she shook her head and walked into the sun bareheaded with her hair an announcement. Drogon rode her shoulder. Rhaegal and Victarion fluttered from cornice to cornice like finches made of knives. They walked through streets where the bricks had been baked when kings had not yet learned to string their names into lines. They passed a square where men were flogged for debts with care, so as not to spoil them for later labor. They saw a boy of 6 with purple-dyed hair carry a tray of almond pastries without looking down, a crown on his head of balance and fear. Dany bought one and handed it to Jiki, who sniffed it with grave suspicion and then ate it in 3 defiant bites. A woman with a baby at her breast lifted her chin at them, and Dany lifted her chin back and thought, briefly, of a tent and a time before milk meant tears. They found the chalk marks again, beside doors. Some chalk was thin, some thick, some numbers were new, some had been rubbed by a hand and written over. Dany stopped and touched one with her forefinger. It left a white line like a cut on her skin. That is a tally, Jorah said. Debt of man or debt of house. In Pentos, they call it obligation. In Braavos, they call it accounting. In Westeros, we call it a hook. That him? Dany looked at the door, and then at the window above it with the shutter half closed. In the slit of shadow, she saw a pair of eyes briefly. She did not look away first. She lifted her finger, chalked, and made a second small line beside a chalk mark that had been scrawled 2 days ago, if the Rain's handwriting could be read. She set her finger to her tongue then, to clean it, and tasted dust and lime, and something like bone. Khaleesi, Eerie whispered. Because men taught to keep their eyes down did not like to see queens writing on their walls. Who comes to collect? Dany asked. Men with rings, Jorah said. Men with scales, men with soft feet. And if no coin is laid in their hands, she asked. They take what fits their hands, Jorah said, or what their hands would like to learn. A daughter's ankle, a son's hours, a husband's back. Dany stood still, and the city moved around her. A hawker cried lemons, lemons, in a voice as sour as his fruit. A dog lifted its leg against a statue of a god who had not kept his promises. A child tugged at Belwas's belt and received a gentle flick on the ear for daring. Dany kept her hand on the chalked door until someone within broke and moved and fled, and then she let it go. When they returned to Illyria's manse, the sun had moved high and was thinking about having a wine nap. Illyria waited with patience on him like a garment. He could put patience on and take it off. He put it aside for her and smiled his deeper smile. "Walks make talk grow sweet," he said. "I will not spoil it. Come. The boy I spoke of is in the city." Oh. He watched her while he said it, and she watched him while he did. And in the space between them, she thought she heard a coin spun and caught. "Then bring him," Dany said, and her voice held no weight and all of it. "Let me see what tricks he has been taught. Let me see which ones he has taught himself." Illyrio's rings chimed. "As my queen commands," he said, and she did not correct him, and did not accept it either. He bowed not quite as deeply as before. Afternoon. In the garden. Bell. He left, and Xaro slid from the cool of a pillar's shadow like something that hates the light. "You will be promised," he said. "A wedding of another sort, perhaps." His smile was not lazy now. "A boy with a name that is also a key will be held up to you like a piece of jewelry. His makers love him. Makers always do. Do you love the things you make?" Dany asked. She did not look at him. She looked at her dragons, who had found a patch of sun and made it brighter. "I love money," Xaro said simply, ringing the word with a laughter that bought it a cushion to sit on. "And I love the man who counts it for me. I love the silks whose price I name. People are poor investments. They rot. You will forgive me for telling you this, my wife." "Do not call me that," Dany said, without heat. And Xaro took the rebuke as a bead to slide on a string of others. He made a small pretty bow and drifted away. Jorah came to her, stood half a pace behind. "You mean to see him then?" he said. "I mean to see what Illyrio thinks fire looks like," Dany answered. She lifted her hands, and her dragons came to them. Obedient and disobedient both. Viserion nibbled at the tip of her thumb scantily. A lover's warning. Rhaegal blinked his lens-bright eyes and settled his length along her forearm, as if her arm were a branch. Drogon moved higher, onto her shoulder, and set his talons above her heart. She went back into the garden as the light thickened, as bees decided their wars for the day, as the pool relearned how to reflect. The air smelled of mint and stone. Belwas hummed again, lower now, and the sound made the orange tree shiver. Dany sat with her spine straight and her knees apart like a boy. Deference to no one's embroidery, and listened for footsteps in a house that breathed like a whale. When at last they came, they were not the footsteps she expected. These were light and confident and numerous. Illyrio came first like a king of sorts, and behind him came two men in foreign mail, and a third with a face that had known wine and knew it too well, and then a youth in plain clothes, the color of wheat at the moment before it is cut, with hair like summer where it burns and eyes the wrong blue for a river. He was not a boy, and the room did not change because he entered it, but it wished to. He had a courtesy about him that had been fitted as carefully as a sword to a scabbard, and a hardness behind the courtesy like the sound of metal when you knock it with another piece of metal. He did not wear a crown. He wore a claim like a cent. "Princess," he said, and bowed the way a prince should bow to a queen if both of them had been taught their lessons from books, and then from blood. His words were Valyrian without getting lost. He raised his head and met her eyes with a steadiness that pretended to be honesty, and might even be it. "I am called Aegon." Dany did not stand. She made the dragon settle with a touch, and laid her hands upon her thighs, and let him watch that too, so he would know that when she moved, it would be for her reasons. The garden, which had a habit of listening, leaned in. "Are you?" she said. "We will see." "AK." He did not flinch at that, which told her what manners had told him. Behind the boy, not a boy, stood the wine-worn man, a watchfulness about him that had nothing to do with the garden or with Illyria's food. He had the look of someone who had measured the distance from every column to every exit, long before he permitted himself a glance at the lilies. A scar ran pale along his jaw into his beard. The two in mail were careful to let their eyes rest on Belwas only as much as respect demanded. If they looked longer, the big man would grin and demand blood. Dany counted their hands. She counted rings, writing them against names in her head. Aegon, Illyrio repeated, tasting the name again for her benefit. Aegon, son of Rhaegar Targaryen by Elia of Dorne. The garden listened with a prickle. Drogon's tail tapped once against her collarbone. Dany looked at the youth's hands. They were not ringed. The knuckles were slightly abraded, the nails cut close. The veins rose when he laced his fingers and lowered his head to accept her gaze without challenge. His hair, sunshot in the green light, wanted to be gold, and had been scoured with cheaper suns for long enough to make do. His boots had been cleaned, but not polished to court shine. If he was a mummer's dragon, his mummers believed in scuffing. "Your Grace," the wine-worn man said, with a formality that belonged to a different room. "It is an honor." His voice had gravel in it. "I am called Griff. I have served the prince since he could walk." "Griff," Dany said, letting the plain name sit. "And who taught him to run?" "Many taught me to run," the youth said before the man could answer. "Griff and others. I was taught to swim in rivers that do not forgive. I have studied accounts and accounts of accounts. I have learned to sit a horse and to clean its sores. I have learned to strike and not to strike. I have learned to speak with men who will not speak plain. I have never learned to fly." He glanced, not quite quickly, at Drogon. "That failing may yet be cured." Belwas snorted softly, amused. Illyrio's flesh seemed briefly to tighten under his rings, as if the metal had pressed teeth into him. Jorah stood at her back like a post driven into good earth. Dany uncurled one hand and let Viseriion's pale muzzle slide beneath her palm. She felt the rasp of scales, the heat. "If you are who you say you are," she said, "the songs say you should kneel." "I have knelt all my life to men I did not name," Aegon replied, and there was no rudeness in it, only a clean statement. He sank to one knee on the tile anyway, unhurried, and without a theatrical flourish. The movement had been practiced often enough to forget itself. His head bowed but not deeply. "I will kneel to you if you are my queen. I would ask to be assured of the truth of both halves of that sentence." "The truth is expensive," Xaro murmured from a pillar's shadow. "Our host can afford it. He will pour you a cup." He smiled at Dany with soft malice. "Stand," she told the youth. "You look like a man being measured for chains." When he rose, she considered the set of his shoulders, the breadth. He would one day have the thickness of a man who has slept outside and eaten what others left, if he lived long enough to grow into it. "Walk with me," she said. Illyrio inclined his head to that, as if she had asked permission, and he had granted it. The wine-worn man, Griff, shifted as if to follow, and Belwas rolled to his feet. But Dany lifted two fingers, and both stopped with a visible effort that showed their obedience to be trained, not natural. Jorah shadowed her because he was her shadow, and no command would change that. They went beneath the trellis. The grapes were still hard, small, sour. The air there held the sweet green of the leaves and the chalk of the wall. A pair of beetles blundered through sunlight like little mailed men. Aegon kept a half pace where a prince ought. Drogon turned his head and considered him with the gravity he reserved for interesting meat. "Say your mother's name," Dany said. "Elia," he answered, and there was grit in the way the name left his mouth, perhaps because sand had been worked into him with it. "Elia, of House Martell, Princess of Dorne, wife to my father." "And your father's?" "Aegar," Aegon said, and something softer entered the syllables. A kind of reverence learned from men who had never seen the man they revered. "Crown Prince of the Seven Kingdoms, son of Aerys," called the mad. "Though we both know madness is a name men give to the parts of truth they cannot bear." "Thou." "What music did he like?" Dany asked and watched his face, not his answer. Songs that made men put their hands on their hearts without meaning to. Aegon said at once, not thinking. The quick narrowing of his eyes afterward told her he knew he had not answered the question asked, but the answer given came from a place he had lived in. I have read the accounts of his skill with the harp. He amended more cautiously. There is a Dornish song that... He stopped. I do not pretend to memory I cannot have. I have made do with traditions, and with those who knew him. What I am in part because he was who he was. Men will tell you he stole a lady, Dany said, mouth curving. Men will tell you he was a poet. They will tell you he wore black armor studded with rubies the size of plums. They will tell you he lost a crown in a river. Men tell many things. They will tell me many of you. If you can no longer see the stones at the bottom, the river is deep, Aegon said. Whether it is deep enough to drown a crown and a man is a matter of current and time. He studied her face as if it might be a field where coins had been spilled. They have told me much of you as well. That you hatched dragons from stone. That you walked into fire. That you were a child when you did both. That you loved a horse lord and he died, and you made grief into wings. Grief was always wings, Dany said. I had only to put them on. She paused at the wall lattice. The diamond-cut view of the street beyond. The same chalk mark, the morning's chalk, glimmered at her as if some doors reached into courtyards no walls could keep separate. What do you know of chalk? She asked, pointing her chin at it. It makes men cough, Aegon said, not smiling. It writes debt. You can rub out with rain if you have enough rain. It marks runes where men grow thin. Good, Dany said. You have been outside kitchens. She shifted Drogon on her shoulder. He made a soft rattling sound, not unlike laughter among leaves. Who teaches you? You will not like some of the answers, he replied. He did not look at Illyrio's walls when he said it, which was also an answer. Griff. Halden Halfmaester. A septa with a good switch. A sellsword who knows how to make an army love him enough to loot for him with care. A river. A winter I was too young to remember. Hunger a few times. And books, when they did not lie. A small line appeared between his brows. I have been taught that the Golden Company will march when called. That there are men who would rather go home than count their coin another year in Volantis. Men say many things of the Golden Company, Dany said. That they never break a contract. That they were founded by a man who carried his father's sword, but not his father's name. That they have elephants and use them cleverly. That they have not forgotten which side their bread was buttered on when there was butter to be had. She let the corner of her mouth move. You will find fewer elephants on a ship than in a song. Some elephants swim, he returned. Or so I have been assured. You have been assured of many things, she said. Her hand lifted of its own accord, the way a breeze lifts the leaves' edges. Aegon held very still while she stepped close enough for Drogon to sniff him properly. The dragon's nostrils widened delicately. With surprising gentleness he tapped his snout once against the youth's shoulder. Aegon did not reach a hand to him, which was wise. You do not smell afraid. I have been told, fear has a smell, he said. I hope to learn it from other men more often than from myself. You have been told many things, she repeated softly. You will have to learn to be the one who tells. She moved away, and the air between them cooled. Why are you here, Aegon not a boy? Why bring your name to my garden? Because Illyrio said you would come, he answered, and she could hear the truth and hear the rest behind it. Because a plan was made for you and for me before either of us had our first teeth. Because the plan floated and then sank and then washed up again, worn smooth and more dangerous. Because I think the plan is wrong, at least in the order of its steps. You think. She tasted the simple words. They had always been short and heavy. Tell me what you think. That dragons fly further when they do not have to carry a whole company on their backs, he said. That the Golden Company will cross for a prince if he shows them Westeros. Not a promise of it. That if I go first, men will see a banner and come. And if you come after, men will see a season change. That some will call you conqueror, and some will call you doom. And some will call you mother, and some will call you a girl who plays with matches. I think that if you are seen beside me, the names will fight each other, and waste our time. I think we should meet again later, on ground we intend to keep. Bah. It was almost insolence, except that insolence had more heat to it. This was wood dry and ready to take fire if she cared to lay a coal upon it. Dany watched his face until she saw the slight tightness around the eyes that spoke of how much he hoped she would lay that coal where he believed it would do the least harm. You would cross with your sellswords, she said, and your little river knowledge, and your name like a lantern in fog, and with men who believe they are going home, he said. They will row faster for that belief than for coin. Coin never tires, Xaro put in, drifting nearer on quiet feet. Men do not row faster because they are promised to see their mothers. They row faster because a whip waits behind them, also because they are paid for every stroke. He smiled at Aegon, as a man smiles at a cat that has been caught pretending to stalk a mirror. Forgive me. Truth makes me intemperate. Dany ignored him. And where, she asked Aegon, do I go if you go first? Where do I put my dragons while you shake the tree? Men? Bravos, Illyrio said at once, coming forward with a softness that did not disturb anything. Or Dragonstone, or White Harbor, if the Manderleys remember old songs. Or you fly to Storm's End and hold court in the place your father could not hold. Or you go to Sunspear and speak to the men whose sister was murdered, by men whose sister was murdered by men whose son now sits athrone. There are many places that will open their doors to a queen with dragons, and none of them are places a sellsword army can arrive without a panic. His rings chimed as he folded his hands. I will arrange letters. I will arrange ships. I will arrange introductions. And chains, Jorah said under his breath, so low only the air heard him. Dany set her heel to the tile. Felt the small grit there. The gardens were tidied every morning, but a city's dust found its way in through any crack. What do you want? She asked Aegon. To pull down a lie, he said very simply, and then to put up something that will not need so much lying to stand. What will you build it with? She asked. With your name? With men whose swords you hire? With half-maesters and septas and a man who calls himself a griff instead of a man? Then, stone, he said, as if the question were a riddle any child could answer. And laws, and the heads of a few men who believe themselves indispensable, so the rest remember they are not. Dany thought of chalk, and of a girl with a pitcher, and of a prince of Pentos who died when the fish did not bite. She thought of Rhaegar, a man whose harp had made women put their hands on their hearts without meaning to. She had not known him. She had known his absence the way a house knows the place where the hearth ought to be. She watched the way Aegon did not glance at Illyrio to see whether he should say more. Come back at sunset, she said, with your griff and your half-maester and your squire, or whoever the other two are. I will feed my dragons then. You may watch. You may ask me a question when they eat. And you will answer? There was the least edge of humor now, almost relief. I will answer, or I will not, she said. And he took that like a cup he had expected to find empty. He bowed, and this time added the fraction of depth. The wine-worn man bowed less, but he bowed, and that told her he could bend, if she held him long enough over a flame. They withdrew, and when their steps faded, the garden exhaled, and Illyria's sigh filled the space. Clever, he said contentedly. He is a good boy when he remembers to be. He will learn to be a good man if good men teach him. I have found a few, I have paid them. I have set meat and patience before them. He spread his hands. What a stew we shall make together, princess. The realm will lick its fingers. And no, do not stand too near the pot when it boils, Dany said without looking at him. After they left her, she sat very still until the sun was a little lower, and the voices of sellers rose beyond the wall in their afternoon pitch. Victarion curled about her wrist, purring flame into her pulse. Rhaegal had found an orange and was attempting to murder it with great seriousness, hissing when the rind fought back with oil. Drogon's eyes went to the lattice and beyond, always beyond. She brushed her thumb along the edge of his jaw and felt the little plates rattle faintly. The boy thinks he is a sword, she said to him. Perhaps he is. You are a fire, We will see what burns. At sunset Illyrio's servants brought 2 goats, Trust and Quiet with a placid, stupid trust that made Jikwi look away. They bled easily. The dragons needed little invitation. They had learned the shape of supper. Drogon's fire bloomed white, and then gold. The little hairs on Dany's forearms prickled in its wash. The garden smelled of burned hair and sweet meat and citrus from the orange he had mangled earlier. Belwas watched with contentment, rubbing his belly as if remembering his own meals. The man had a gourmand's delicate appreciation of slaughter. Aegon returned with 3. Griff had washed and refused a more expensive shirt. His mail hung beneath a plain jerkin and had been mended cleverly where a link had parted. A man with a scholar's narrow mouth and a healed break in his nose stood at his left. He had a maester's chain on, not a full weight, the metals mismatched and odd. Haldan Halfmaester then, or his likeness. The big one the youth called Duck had the earnest eyes of a dog and shoulders that would make any squire's pride ache. They stood as men who wished to look respectful to a creature that was devouring something in front of them, and failed because instinct told them to stand ready to move instead. Ask, Dany said when Drogon had dragged half a carcass behind the fig tree to make a feast of privacy, and Viserion had abandoned the second goat half-eaten simply to watch his black brother with malicious adoration. Aegon's gaze shifted from the dragons to her and stayed. He did not speak at once, which pleased her. Will they fly where you tell them? He said finally. Or do you fly where they go? Both, she said. And neither. They are not horses. They are not hawks. Even hawks do not fly because you tell them to. They fly because you ask at the right moment, and because they like your eyes. She tasted the line of her bottom lip. They know me. Their heat knows mine. Their hunger knows mine also. Then I will ask a second, he said too quickly for a prince taught to count his liberties. He checked himself with visible labor. Do men know you the same way? Does hunger mean the same thing to them? It does, she said. It does not. Men will die for a hunger that is not theirs. Men will live with one that is, and think it virtue. She stood so the last of the day fell along her shoulders. A pale river. The Golden Company, will they come for you? They have sworn, Griff said, his gravel dry. And they remember the old blood. Their oaths would not bring them for me, Dany asked, and the question was a knife wrapped in silk. For a mother of dragons and a daughter of the line that gave them their first work. Haldan Halfmaester's narrow mouth grew narrower. The company has sworn for exiles and princes and lost men for near 100 years, he said. They remember many things. Some men in it remember another dragon. Some remember that dragon's enemies. Some remember a purse. Some remember the taste of home. It is a stew, as our generous host likes to say. It will be eaten, but it will taste different with each spoon. My queen, Jorah murmured, a warning against tasting too much of a cook's poetry in one sitting. If they would not come for me, Dany said, will they come if I ask them to come for you? She let the possibility sit there in the growing dark. If I say, go, and I shall come after. If I say, plant this flag, and I shall blow the wind. No. The boy who was not a boy's face changed in a way that made his youth more visible. If you ask, he said slowly, some will say it is because you did not want to come alone. Some will say it is because you mean to take what I build once it is built. And what will you say? She asked. The line returned between his brows. I will say that I asked you to stand aside because I wanted men to see me as more than a name and a kitchen plan, and that I have no wish to stand beside you until I can stand at your side without making you smaller, he said. I will say that I will give the realm back to itself, and then to you, he swallowed, and hope to be allowed to keep a part of it. And if I say I do not give realm pieces to boys because they ask pretty, she said lightly, then I will take what I can and we will speak in a different room, he answered, not angry. Belwas laughed, delighted by threats when they were honest. Boy can talk, he announced to no one. Boy does not shake. Boy would look good with scar. He traced with his finger across his own belly, a path only he understood. There is a war in words already, Haldan observed. It might profit all of us to remember that words are sometimes cheaper than what comes after them. Sometimes they are dearer, Dany said. A coin that can purchase either bread or iron is not a coin to spend twice. They left her again, at last, with Illyrio pleased, and Xaro smiling, the way a curtain smiles when the wind touches it, and Jorah angry, in the quiet way he saved, for when she had stepped into a room he had argued against. Night took the garden back, leaf by leaf, tile by tile. Dany sat with her feet in the cool grass beside the pool, and watched little gnats turn themselves into rings in the air, making and remaking the symbols of their small religion. Drogon lay along the low wall like a black river that had forgotten it should move. His breath hissed once, soft as joy. She did not sleep in the big bed. She lay instead on a pallet near the dragons, a habit that had no good sense in it, and every good sense at once. Somewhere, a woman sang to a baby with a voice that had been used to sing to men first. Pentos had many uses for voices. Dany closed her eyes and saw a river with a crown in it, and a hand reaching and not reaching. When the masked woman came, she had changed her mask. Now it was plain wood cut into a face that could have been any face. "Glass breaks," the woman said without preamble. "So do boys. Do not put your foot on a shard and then tell me your blood is an argument." "Who are you?" Dany asked again for the 100th time in those dreams. "I am what you will call me when you choose to," the voice replied. "The mummers will paint and sing. You will have to decide whether the music is about a boy or about a stage. Cups are filled for a reason," Dany said dully. "Yes. And sometimes they are filled with poison," the woman said. "Remember to ask who pours." She lifted both empty hands and let the night fall out of them. North, west, ice, iron, salt, shadow. You think you will choose among them, but they will choose you if you stand still long enough. Dany woke before dawn, with salt on her tongue and a wish to fly in her bones that felt like thirst. She rose and went to the outer wall alone and climbed to the walk along its top. The city spread itself for her inspection like a merchant laying fabrics across a table. A blue quarter where tiles had been glazed in the same kiln. A white quarter where houses had been lime-washed against a bad summer. A brown quarter where mud had dried and cracked and no one had yet bought the paint that would make it look less like what it was. Along the river, barges lay beached like sleeping seals, their bellies full of wheat. Beyond, the fields began with a modesty that promised a harvest if weather gods did not laugh. A bell began to ring, a deep one that told men to bring carts and shoulders to the gate, a thinner one that told women to put bread in and take bread out. The city was poor in some rooms, and rich in others, and frightened in all of them, as cities are. Dany set her hands on the parapet and let the stones cold seep into her wrists. The narrow sea lay beyond all of this, not visible, but feeling itself felt. Westeros was a word, a wind, a road of water. She closed her eyes and named names to herself, so they would be ready if she had to speak them to strangers later. Dark, Dot. Lannister, Tot. Darrell, Dut. Greyjoy, Martell. Aaron, Dot. Baratheon, Dot. Tully. Targaryen, Dot. The last name tasted of smoke and something like lemon. Jorah found her. He was a careful man. His boot made a small sound to give her the choice of turning. She turned. He had not slept much. He never did when she did not. He had shaved badly in the dark. A small nick at his jaw bled in a dot that looked like a foreign letter. "Tell me." Too weary to pretend she would not listen, he came to stand with his elbows on the parapet, as if he had leaned against too many stones in too many places to feel shame in admitting he needed them. "I have judged too quickly the men who sent you gifts," he said. "Perhaps Illyrio's kitchens will feed us into a better future." He blew out a breath through his nose. "Or perhaps he will fatten us like goats for his dragons." "My dragons?" She moved her eyes, not her head. "Hiss," Jorah said. "His plans. His tidy world where the boy in you never choose a thing he did not account for. The griff there, John Connington. If he is who he looks to be, has more iron in him than Illyrio allows for. But Illyrio likes to wrap iron in fat and call it a cushion. The half-maester will measure everything and call his measures justice. The boy will bleed his first and then think himself cleansed. He shook his head once. I do not like this stew you said last night. I say I don't like it either, but we might have to eat a bowl. You believe he is John Connington? Dany asked, tasting the name. Rhaegar's friend. A man who had failed and made failure his meat until he could swallow it without flinching. I believe his eyes know the shapes of rooms I have stood in, Jorah said, and that his scorn for poets is learned and not natural. Ain't smile, colorless. He stinks less of wine than he used to, if he is the man, and that says a thing about his purpose. Would you go with him? She asked. If I said go, would you sail with the Golden Company and their elephants to Westeros and plant a flag so I could follow? No, Jorah said. It was very simple and very heavy. I would go where you went. I have knelt all my life to men. One man, really, who never looked at me. I've stood at doors that opened for them, and not for me. I would not choose another man to open doors for, even if a plan says it would be clever. Ben? Belwaz would go if there were goats, Dany said, and Jorah's mouth twitched. It was enough to lighten the cold in her wrists. They did not eat breakfast in Illyria's hall. They took a little bread and cheese in the garden, and Dany shared a piece with a cat who had learned that her hands were not dangerous. When Illyrio came, he came with parchment and a smile that sat low on his face. Letters, he said. Names and seals. The Prince of Pentos will blink and bow and do as I ask because I will ask him in the way he likes. The Triarchs in Volantis will say no in 5 different words that all mean later. The Archon of Tyrosh will say yes, and then send someone to count how many yeses he may have said, without being discovered. The Sea Lord of Braavos will say nothing, which is his favorite thing to say. But his bankers will say yes if a number is written properly beneath a different number. The Martells will read and wait for a wind. They have waited a long time. They can do it standing on one foot. Braavos hates dragons, Dany said. They hid from dragons once at the beginning of the world, and called it clever. Braavos loves coin, Illyrio answered, as if those two thoughts could be married in a warm bed and beget something useful. You will not ask them for a loan. They will offer you 1.2. I need ships, she said. Not loans, not letters. You have ships, he reminded her, mild. Many of them silk, some of them stubborn. All of them yours as long as I wish them to be. He held her gaze. I wish them to be. For now. Let us not trip on the words. For now, when we have so many stones near our feet already. The day passed in talk that knotted itself, and then unknotted enough to give the illusion of progress, as talk always did in houses built by men like Illyrio. By noon, Dany had more plans than she had fingers. By afternoon, she had fewer plans and more resolve. At dusk, she let Aegon into her garden again and asked him to tell her a story. He chose one about a fisherman who had 4 sons and a net with 3 holes. Each son mended one, but the net still sank in a storm because the father had sold a weight to buy a jug. It was a simple story and untrue in the way true stories are sometimes untrue. He told it well enough. She told one in return about a woman who bought a lemon tree because it made her remember a red door that had never belonged to her, and then learned that the tree would thrive only if she carried water to it every dawn for 3 years. On the 3rd day after his arrival, Aegon came with a different man. A priest with a woman's hands, a straight back, a mouth that had taught children kindness by first teaching them the names of their bones. Septa Lemore, he said, and the name shook dust loose from very old corners of the house. Lemore bowed and did not smile at Dany, and Dany liked her at once for that. The Septa smelled of soap. She looked at the dragons without crossing herself, which told Dany she was not easily cowed by the gods other men used as sticks. You will teach him mercy, Dany said to her. I have taught him hunger, Lemore said. Mercy grows badly in that soil, but it lives. She lifted her hands and let them fall. I have told him to read the backs of the men who bow to him. not only their faces. Good, Dany said. Teach him to read chalk as well. It would have been a pretty thing to have the city love her for paying 100 debts herself, for making chalk into coin by sleight of hand. But she knew better than to buy markets with pennies. Instead, she walked again through the streets with Belwas and Jorah and Irri and Jiqui, and men learned her hair and her step, and that the dragon's shadows visited their walls in one particular hour. Children followed, bold and quick. Dany had a purse on her and kept it closed. When a man with ink-stained fingers spat a slur at her dragon's backs, Belwas turned and smiled, and the man reconsidered the taste of his own teeth. At one door, where the chalk was thick, Dany knocked. No one answered. She knocked again. A woman opened, thin as river grass, a baby asleep along her forearm, the other hand red with dye that would not come out for a fortnight. "Who holds your chalk?" Dany asked in the woman's tongue, rough and careful. The woman's eyes went to Dany's hair, and then to her dragons, and then to the street. She said a name that belonged to a man who wore soft shoes. Dany went on without saying more, but she kept the name and the door in her mind like pebbles in a pocket. When she returned to Illyrio's, she told him the name and watched the smile on his face go smaller. "Sometimes the soft shoes are my shoes," he said. "I cannot take off both at once without cutting my feet." "Then put on different ones," Dany said. "Or walk where the stones are not so sharp." Aegon listened to these exchanges with the awkward attentiveness of a youth eavesdropping on a marriage. Dany did not invite him to the chalk doors. She walked with him instead along the river where the barges came and went, and he told her how far a load of wheat would travel before rat and rot took their share, and she told him how far a dragon could go before he must land for wing and fire and rest. He spoke of bridges built with a tax on laughter. She spoke of taxes paid by fear and smoke. Once, at the end of a day that had been all talk and no blood, and so felt dangerous, she asked him, "What will you do with the men who murdered your mother?" He looked at her, very still, until she knew he was seeing a room that had no walls, only a bed and a woman who had already begun to die. "Your question presumes I will find them," he said, and the gentleness in it was as sharp as a shard of glass. "If the world is just, they are dead already. If it is unjust, they may yet live. In either case, revenge is a kind of footstool that buckles if you put too much weight on it. I will kill the ones I lay hands on. I will not build my throne out of their skulls." "Good," she said. "Skulls make poor furniture." "And you?" He returned the question with surprising boldness. "What will you do to the men who sold you? To the ones who used you as a key? They will find my name in their throats when they swallow," Dany said. "And perhaps a little fire, if they choke." She let the wind have her hair for a breath. "But I will not spend the first years of my reign going from house to house like a debt collector. I have other debts to settle." "Talk," he said softly. "Chalk," she said. By the end of a week in Pentos, the city had learned to sleep with one ear open for wings. A guild of fishmongers petitioned the Prince of Pentos to forbid dragons within a league of the market. Illyrio smothered that with an easy hand. A Bravosi factor sent a boy with a shaved head and a ledger to inquire how long the queen meant to remain. Illyrio fed the boy candied orange peel and sent him home with a letter that would unfold and keep unfolding for days, until the factor lost patience and hired a ship. A windblown recruit master, Pentos bred sellswards the way hot granaries bred rats, came to sniff at Belwas, and left with one ear ringing and a gratitude he could not afford. Jorah kept watch upon Griff's lodgings and learned that he drilled the youth at dawn and at dusk, and that sometimes he drank, but less than he wished to. On the 9th day, a feather fell out of the sky in the garden, and lay on the tile for a long time like a black word. Dany looked up and saw nothing. Izaro said, entirely without malice, "Sometimes when everything stands at once, it means it is time to push one thing and see which fall." "I do not like your games," Dany told him. He inclined his head as a man does when his point has been made. That evening, Dany sent for Aegon and Griff and Haldan and Lemore and Duck. She had them eat with her under the trellis, the grapes larger now, the leaves thicker. She told them what Illyrio's letters had said and not said, and what ships could be had in a month, and what in 2, and what harbors would receive them with water, and what with arrows. She told Aegon that the Golden Company had sent word by a Myrish man with oil on his hair and care in his shoes, that they would strike their tents in Old Volantis when elephants had done defecating on the memories the company had pitched there for 20 years. She told him that a storm had blown a Carthene galley onto the rocks east of the city, and that the sailors had all lived and all asked to change ships. Men like to be on the side of a story they can explain to their mothers, Haldon said, thin mouth thinner. A dragon is a difficulty. A dragon is a reason, Dany said. She looked at Aegon. The lanterns made islands of light on his face. We are going to play their game, a little. You will go. I will follow. You will not go far. If you plant your banner somewhere that can be taken from you in a day, I will not come. If you choose a place that asks me to burn more than it gives, I will not come. You will not say my name falsely or sell it for a night's safe lodging. His breath left him with the sound of a door opening. You agree. I agree to nothing yet but a dance. She said, You may have the first step. Do not assume I will watch with my hands folded. Nah. Where? Griff asked, his gravel sharpened. He had not liked any of this, but he saw the usefulness in a sword that set itself upon his shield rather than his throat. Where will we test this dance? Not King's Landing, Dany said. Not at first. Not a place where spiders have spun so much thread that they cannot see their own fingers. Not a place where the queen will pour wildfire in the gutters to give her daughter's green hair. She let herself taste the map Illyrio had had a boy unroll that morning, her fingers sliding along coasts like a little ship. The Stormlands, she said at last. A hard country. A sullen one. Robert's men will not forget a stag's name, but a storm does not ask a stag permission to blow. There are castles there that have had their pride kicked, and will like a chance to kick back. Take some with you who know which doors to knock. Griff knows those doors, Haldon said, and Dany saw the flicker in the older man's eyes he had not wished to show, and had not quite kept from showing. He knows them very well. Good, Dany said. She leaned back and watched the lantern light breathe. When you have your first stone. A word. No one else will know to mean what it means. What word? Aegon asked, eager enough to make Jorah shift his weight behind her. Lemon, she said, her mouth dry. Send me a lemon. Lemons do not grow in the Stormlands, Haldon said unhelpfully. I know. She said, That is why the word will be yours. Aegon smiled for the first time without measuring the smile first. It made him look his age, which was both less and more than the number of his years. We will send you a lemon, he said. We will send you a grove. Send me the debt mark wiped off a woman's door, she said, and the smile went away, replaced with something that might yet matter. They dispersed like a troupe of actors at curfew. Illyrio came after, curious and careful. Dany told him enough to make him feel a hand on his shoulder, and not enough to make him think he held the reins. Xaro went away satisfied without knowing why. He liked to be present at the beginning of stories so he could claim later he had been the one who laid the first sentence down. Very late, when only the fountain spoke, a thin old man in a plain brown robe and a white beard, like an icicle's lace, came to the garden and stood a very long time in the shadows at the edge. He did not cough. He did not shuffle. He waited until Dany looked up because some part of her had begun to think of white beards and of leanness, and of a sword set aside. He stepped forward then and bowed. Very, very properly, more properly than any pirate of Pentos had bowed in 4 generations. Your Grace, he said. Arstan, Dany said, because Illyrio had sent word 2 nights ago that an old man from the east had come to serve, and she had put off meeting him because she had been busy being suspicious of boys. Do you sing? I do not. Arstan Whitebeard said, I am better at listening. He lifted his head, and his eyes found the dragon's, and softened in a way that taught her How many years had been folded inside those white folds. There are songs here enough for me. Good, she said. Then listen to me now. We are going to try to change the wind without blowing down the house. Then you will need men who know how houses are built, he said quietly. And men who will tell you when the roof leaks without asking for a new roof for their troubles. I have one, she said, and thought of Jorah at the door. I may have two, if you are who Illyrio says you are. I am who I am, Arstan said with a half-smile oiled with regret. For now, she repeated. It had become a charm in this house. Go and sleep, old man. Tomorrow we will speak of Storm's End. Storm's End holds when storms do not, he said. It will be good to see it again. He placed a hand over his heart. To see it, I mean. I am an old man. My seeing is not what it was. He went. Jorah came out of the dark where he had been pretending not to watch. Do you trust him? He asked. No, Dany said. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But I think he knows a roof from a wall. Then no. You will need to know the same, he said. You have been a storm. Now you will have to be a house. She lay again on the pallet near the dragons, and the city lay down around her like a dog in need of a better bone. Somewhere a ship's bell rang thrice. Somewhere a woman laughed in a tone that made the laugh's owner sound more tired than the laugh wanted her to admit. Dany slept, and in her dream the narrow sea had shrunk to a green road between lemon trees, and a boy with gold-burnt hair walked ahead of her with a basket for fruit. When he reached up to pick one, his shadow looked for a moment like a crown. When she reached up, her shadow looked for a moment like wings. The next morning, the Magister's scribes were soldiers. They came with long lists instead of spears, and rolled maps like banners. The day after, 3 ships took on sacks of biscuit and casks of fresh water and lengths of rope and sailed without fanfare for the disputed lands and the mouth of the Windwater. On the 3rd day after, Illyrio brought her a letter sealed with wax, imprinted with an elephant. They go, he said, pleased. They thump the earth as they go, and they leave their dung where it will do the most good. Men, Jorah grunted, unimpressed by the expensive joke. And so the fleet under other names left, and a smaller fleet stayed, and Pentos kept its face turned toward its morning breads and its evening fish, and pretended that nothing in its bones had shifted. Dany moved through it with her dragons, and learned which corners caught the light and which caught knives, and she waited for a lemon. It came not by ship, and not by bird, but by a boy with a cut to his lip, and a piece of parchment folded tight, as if the folding itself were a secret. He knelt without being asked, and held the paper up on 2 palms. Dany took it. The seal was plain. She broke it, and read the single word written there in an even hand. Bite. She closed her eyes for a beat, and saw a door red as a tongue, and a tree with fruit, like small suns. She opened them and found Jorah's face, prepared for every answer, and Illyria's just beyond, prepared as well, and Arstan's further back, not prepared so much as braced. Where? She asked the boy. He licked the blood at his lip and said, Griffin's Roost, as if it were the name of a sweet. Taken at dawn. The men said to say there was wind enough. Men know. Griffin's Roost, Jorah repeated, with a complexity of emotion that made his rough voice briefly smooth. Of course he would go there. Of course, Dany said. The world had a sense of theater when it was being written by men who loved stories about themselves. Send letters. She told Illyrio. And to Arstan. Find me the weather for the next week. And to Jorah. Count our oars. She put her fingers to Drogon's jaw and felt the small rattle as he tasted the wind. Khaleesi? Irri asked, and the smallness in her voice told Dany that whichever way she chose, the water would eat someone. We go, Dany said softly enough that the garden had to lean closer to hear. But we go like a house, not a storm, with our roof tied down. Izaro, who had appeared to discover he had been made spectator, drew a scented breath. My wife goes to visit an old castle, he said, delighted. I will choose a silk to match the stones. Stay, Dany said without looking at him. Guard my lemons. If any man sells them too soon, I will know whose throat to pour their juice down. Mend. It pleased him to be teased. That was the sort of man he had made himself to be. He made a low reverence and withdrew like a curtain in a kind wind. Illyrio rubbed his rings together and sent boys running with letters that would bloom like paper flowers in 100 hands. Jorah started to talk about sales and drafts and currents and men who did not need to be told the same thing twice. Arstan asked sensible questions. Belwas asked about goats. The dragons turned their narrow heads west, as if the word roost had been a bell rung inside them. Dany stood in the garden that had become her antechamber to a world, and felt the pull of the narrow sea in the crooks of her elbows and the hollows behind her knees. Pentos thrummed with the small noises of itself. The chalk marks upon doors would be rubbed and rewritten. Debts would be paid in coin or in backs. The Prince of Pentos would breathe for another season. A masked woman without a name would put her hands out and let the night fall from them, or catch it again. A boy who was and was not a boy would hold briefly a perch on a cliff and call it his, and men would come to see whether the precipice belonged to their fathers. Dany pressed her palm flat to Drogon's scales. He leaned into it with a child's heedless hunger for touch. Home, she told him. We will make it, if it does not already exist. He hissed once, and the sound was not a promise, only breath. It was enough. They weighed the anchors at midday under a sky, the color of hammered pewter, a sky that promised weather if not yet a storm. Men hauled lines with the economical grunts of those who had done it yesterday, and would do it tomorrow, until they were too old to climb. The oars went out like legs from a centipede. Sails were shaken, caught, trimmed. Illyrio stood on his balcony like a fat gull pretending to be a lighthouse, and waved his rings at them as if rings could warm a wind. Dany raised her hand to him. Gratitude without permission, and lowered it before his servants' cheers could turn into a story she had not chosen. Jorah stood at her hip as the city began to dwindle. Arstan Whitebeard had come aboard just before the gangplank drew in, white beard unruffled by the harbor stink, his bundle small enough to make him look poorer than he was. Belwas thundered happily down the gangway with a wineskin in one hand and a wheel of hard cheese tucked against his stomach like a baby. He had insisted he would not be left behind to guard lemons or anything else. Irri and Jikwi clung together at first, and then apart as the ship altered its breathing, and they learned how to lean when it leaned. Pentos receded as all cities did, becoming first a map, then a pattern, then a thought. The harbor gates did not care. The river did not. The sea did not. Drogon stood on the prow and screamed once. A sound flensed clean by the wind. A wordless black explanation that made two sailors drop coils of rope and cross themselves in the same breath before snatching the rope back up with frightened hands. Victarion and Rhaegal clambered up the foremast and claimed the high cross trees. Their tails twitched tight to keep balance. Their wings cupped to catch scents men could not name. They did not take the straight road west. A straight road invites company. Their lead captain, one of Xaro's men, with ears pierced with little bells that rang when he shook his head, let the silk of his sails lead them south and west along the curve of the coast, keeping the land a constant thumb's breadth off their starboard rails. They threaded between clumsy grain barges and sleek Taroshi cutters, with painted eyes on their prows that watched them pass and pretended not to see dragons. At dusk, the bells in the captain's ears pealed a little lament as he took soundings in a channel littered with the bones of ships older than some cities. At night, they hove to in the lee of a low island, where scrub clung to the stone and gulls despised them with full-voiced scorn from their nests. Fires winked on the beach, a few, where sweated men roasted fish and swore that fish roasted ashore tasted different from fish roasted aboard. Dany did not go ashore. She lay under the awning with Drogon draped from shoulder to hip like a sash of night, Rhaegal a curve of green heat against her shins, Victarion heavier than his color implied against her feet. Irri slept on her cloak with a hand tucked under her cheek like a girl in a warm house. Jiki lay on her back and watched stars as if they might fall into her mouth and become tales without her having to tell them. In the dark, the ship moved even when it did not, and the sound of its timbers was a speech that repeated itself without ever growing stale. Dany half slept and saw a lemon tree in a courtyard and a red door that would not open unless she remembered the exact song her mother had sung once, when there was still a mother and songs were not incantations. She woke with salt on her lips and the taste of chalk on the back of her tongue, as if she had licked her own writing on a pentoshi door. By the third day they were among the stepstones, where the sea had shattered a mountain range and strewn the pieces like a spoiled child's game across the water. Channels ran between the islands like veins between knuckles. Wind shifted and shifted again, turning fickle at each headland. Sails were made and unmade. Jorah stood with his feet apart and his hand around the shrouds, as if he were holding a beast by the neck to keep his balance. Arstan stood as if he had been born on a deck. Belwas tried to catch a crab from the stern with a loop of line, fell in, and came up laughing with a crab attached to his forearm that he admired for its courage before he ate it raw to teach it humility. Pirates. The captain with the bell ears warned they would see, and they did, once. The sort of long, fast galley that had men for oars and 2 masts and a cruel mouth painted on its prow. It came out of a haze. The haze parted to show its oars like fishbones. A banner at its stern flapped green and white, in a wind that smelled of cut rope and old fear. Men on its deck looked small and intent, as men do when they think something ahead will answer a question they have not dared ask aloud. Dany stepped to the rail with Drogon on her shoulder, and Drogon made his throat bright and hissed a sheet of fire thin and long as a whip over open water, and the pirate ship fell off its line so quickly its own wash climbed its side and frightened its oarsmen. They did not try again. Brave, Belwas pronounced around an apricot pit, but stupid. He spat the pit precisely into a coil of rope. Need goat. Everything needs a goat in your councils, Jorah told him. And Belwas nodded solemnly, as if he had made the whole world sensible with that truth. On the 6th day the wind veered from south to west, and deepened from a breath to a hand, to a shoulder shove. The sea changed its mind. Waves came short, confused, white-headed, slapping the hull as if insulted by the way it split them. Men lashed down anything that would move. The dragons loved it. They took to the air and were thrown by the gusts, recovered, traded heights, shouted at each other and the clouds. The fleet hung together badly for a time. The gap between their lead ship and the third widened until Dany could see the seas back between them like a strip of flayed hide. Then the bell-eared captain altered his cut just so, and the 4th ship corrected to keep his shadow, and the 5th and the little herd found itself with a shepherd again. Saladhor Saan found them at sunset, with a laugh big enough to be heard over wind and canvas. He came up on their port bow in a caravel painted the color of sinful grapes, her rail crowded with men whose clothes had known dye in happier days. His pennant showed a pair of gilded mermaids so generously breasted they looked as if they would drown of their own accord. Saan himself stood at the quarterdeck rail with a goblet in one hand, and a jewel in his ear that could have paid for a village, if villages were bought in the markets where Saladhor shopped. Queen, queen, little queen. He sang out in the common tongue, his Lysine syllables slipping on the deck like spilled wine. I have dreamed of you 3 times. Once my ship sank, and your dragons ate me. Once your dragons sank, and I ate them. Once we both sank, and an honest man in Old Town swore he saw us walking together out of the sea with salt in our hair like crowning jewels. Which would you prefer? Now? None, Dany called back, amused in spite of herself. Ah, a woman of sense, Saan cried, delighted. I bring news for sense. Stannis the Manus plays at king in a castle on a rock, with priests who love fire too much even for my taste. The lion in the city has grown a fresh beard that smells of the reach. The kraken has arms everywhere like gods. The Golden Company takes the old stones above a cliff and says they will take more. Men are writing down names in their books and leaving blanks for yours. Now. Dany leaned into the wind and tasted the name he had dropped like a sweet. Griffin's Roost. Just so. Saladhor Saan cried. A handsome perch. A cliff for a banner. The old griffin's eyrie for the griffin's chick. He lifted his goblet. Will you come to my cabin and drink with me and let me name my price for telling you the news you just told yourself? I have wine, she said, and he put his hand to his heart in mock grief. Everyone thinks they have wine, San lamented. Few do. Fewer have sense to drink it when they should. If we meet in another channel and we are both still above the water, I will collect a story from you instead of a coin. I have always preferred stories. They weigh less in a storm. He kissed his fingers to her and let the wind spin him away, his crew laughing like men who had won a purse that turned out to be full of honey cakes. Listen, Jorah muttered, but his scorn was only half. He has carried more kings on his back than a good horse should. He has never carried a dragon, Belwas observed, thumping his chest in case anyone had forgotten the obvious. They made the passage across the wide blue between the islands and Westeros, proper in 2 long days that felt longer. The sea changed again, its taste pulling toward something stonier, colder. The birds altered. Fewer bright gulls, more dark petrels with mournful voices. The wind brought them the smell of kelp and pine, and once so faintly she could have imagined it, wet earth after rain. Dany stood at the forward rail until her fingers cramped, listening for a sound she had never heard in waking life. Waves against a shore named for fathers she never had. They sighted land at dawn, a distant bruise at first, then a gray line, then cliffs shouldering up out of the water. The sun made a slow story of their edges. The color of the stone changed as they drew nearer, red in streaks like rust, black in seams, a pale chalky smear where something had fallen. A tower stood on a point and refused to be moved by wind or gulls. Beyond, where the cliffs bent, she saw the mouth of a bay that had been made by a giant with a single careless blow. Shipbreaker Bay, the captain murmured, and spat to placate what lived there. They did not go inside the bay's jaw. Men with sense girded a mouth that had eaten fleets. The belly-eared captain cut north and west along the teeth of the coast, feeling the wind with his hands as if it were a horse he had broken himself. They kept low. Sails were reduced. Men spoke in their throats. Jorah's eyes never left the land. Our stands never left the men. Belwas had fallen asleep sitting upright with his knife in his fist, the point resting between his big toes and his snores counting the seconds better than the glass. They made land, not at a harbor, but at a bight in the coast where the sea had worried stone until it gave. A shingle lay like spilled coins between 2 arms of rock. Beyond it scrub grew thick and thorny to the edge of a short cliff. A gull had decreed the place his, and stood upon a black stone to argue the matter with them incessantly. Boats went over the side one by one, oars dipped without splash. Men bent to the work with shoulders and backs, and the fear of anyone who has ever learned how far sound carries over water. Dany went down the ladder like a common woman in a shift stealing home at dawn. Drogon refused the boats and took the air. Victarion and Rhaegal went with him, green and gold slashes against a pale sky. The boat grounded. The water that ran around Dany's legs was a shock. Not warm as in Slaver's Bay, but something that announced itself with a knife and receded without apology. She stood on a Westerosi beach for the first time in her memory. The shingle moved under her feet like a thing alive, and she had to adjust her balance differently than on a deck. Eyrie came down the boat ribs, with an expression of fierce determination that told Dany she would walk on water itself, before she would fall in. Jiki hissed once at the cold, and suffered. They crossed the shingle to the scrub, leaving their ships with their masts furled like men hugged their own ribs in a winter wind. The path beyond was not a path, so much as a place where men had walked prudently in single file once or twice before, and the scrub had failed to grow back out of an abundance of suspicion. The thorns tried for Dany's skirts and found instead the fire that lived in the dragons. They shrank without understanding why. The land smelled of salt and iron and crushed herbs. Somewhere out of sight a bell tolled exactly once, and the silence afterward was as large as a hall. The first men they saw were not enemies. They were boys younger than Aegon, with spears too long for their strength and boots too big for their feet and faces, held carefully stiff against the sight of 3 dragons. The oldest of them, 17 at most, with a beard like mold, stepped into the path and held up a hand as if he could stop the world if he remembered the right word. "Who goes?" he asked, and the bravery in his squeak would have made her love him a little if she had not already loved this land more than she had meant to. "A woman looking for a lemon," Dany said, and when his face flickered with incomprehension, she added, "Tell Lord Connington that." He blinked twice, nodded as if men told him nonsense daily, and he had learned the uses of it, and insisted upon escorting them with his spear point, held downward as if lowering it by an inch would make the dragons go away. They went through scrub, and then low trees, and then along a sheep track, where the uncollected droppings underfoot were a language Jorah read with irritation. The land lifted in slow ribs. The sea fell behind them, though the wind continued to come from it with hands full of knives. At last they saw a wall built of stones picked from fields, and set upon one another with care and mutual contempt. Beyond it, the ground rose again to a tor, and on the tor, a grey keep, crouched as if it had grown out of the rock, and would grow back into it when men forgot its name. Griffin's Roost. Dany had not expected it to look like grief. It did. The grey of its walls had bled into the grey of the sky. The banners at its towers had not yet remembered their colors, morning being new. There were men on the wall with bows. There were men at the gate with the particular stillness of those who have learned that most movements near gates portend trouble. When the boy shouted, there was no bustle, which told her more than bustle would have. Griff ran a tight household even in victory, as men who had lost households before learned to do. The gate opened inwards without a groan. John Connington stood in the arch, plain in a dark surcoat, his hair more silver than copper now, his beard cut to obey a soldier's notion of neatness rather than a court's. The smell of wine lived in his pores the way battle smell lives in some men's clothes. He had scrubbed himself in sobriety but could not scour himself free of the habit of regret. He bowed and made it look like an apology to the stone. "Your Grace," he said, and meant it. "You honor us." "Lord Connington," she replied. She did not call him Griff. That was a family name, and she had not yet decided whether she was family. She looked beyond him, and Aegon stood there in the shadows of the entry with Lemore at his shoulder, and Haldan, and Duck, and 3 men Dany did not yet know by name. He looked like a man trying to be a keep that would hold without mortar. He had slept, but badly. His eyes told that tale. His hair made a sheen where light struck it. A boy had combed it very carefully and hoped for praise. He had a sword at his hip, and his hand did not touch it. "Your lemon," he said very simply, and smiled a little, quick and gone. "Let us see if it is ripe," Dany replied, and crossed into the keep that once had been his father's friend's, and now was his, or as much his as anything men hold for a season in a wind. The great hall was not so great. It had been made for men who came in muddy and cold, and needed something bigger than their small lives for a while. The rushes had been changed. A new banner hung at the high end. A red griffin rampant upon a field that had once been white, and now was the color of old snow. Fire burned on the hearth like a working man, steady and intense, not theatrical. Aegon did not take the high seat. He stood on the second step down with his hands behind his back, as if his hands might otherwise argue with him. Lemore went to the side and became a wall. Haldan became a ledger. Duck became a door. Rainhouse sent a dove, John Connington said without preamble. Felwood will send their banners when their men return from their fields. The men of Estermont sent words so polite, I suspect they are sharpening their knives while they speak them. The Tarth sent a watchman to the top of their highest tower, and made him count our banners aloud before they told him to come down. King's Landing has not answered because it is in love with itself. Storm's End is held in the king's name, but by men who would rather not die in his. The Weeping Town wept as usual, and then asked how many loaves we would need if we came by, and pretended we were only travelers. Then see. Good, Dany said. Corners listen when you speak. That is always the first sign a hall is worth the keeping. She took a seat lower than Aegon, and higher than any other woman might have had she taken a seat at all. Jorah stood behind her, at a respectful angle that allowed him to see both doors. Arstan chose a place where his old eyes watched the fire, and the fire watched them back. Belwa sat on the floor with his back to a pillar and began to cut the hard cheese with loving thoroughness, carving it into precise soldiers that he ate in ranks. You came quickly, Aegon said. I said the word only 4 days ago. I had sails already. She said, and I do not like to let fruit sit on a branch any longer than it chooses to. Men come with knives to fruit that hangs too long. You find enemies even in orchards. Haldon murmured, disapproving and admiring in equal measure. In orchards especially, Dany said. They spoke then of lines on a map and the space between them, where men truly lived. John Connington's finger moved across the rough plan of the Stormlands, drawn on parchment that had been a tithe roll in a year when smallfolk had had more goats than they had this year. Here, he said, tapping the Weeping Town, where the road bent with the shore. If we stand a day in their market and do nothing, half the Stormlands will hear we have eaten their fish. If we pay for the fish and we eat them cheerfully, a quarter will think we are saints. If we take the fish and call it a levy, a quarter will think we are kings. Now, we will pay, Dany said, and the look Jorah sent her was proud and practical and resigned to whatever that would cost. Paying requires coins, Haldon said dryly. Coins are metal, Dany said. Men have metal, I have fire. We will see which is scarcer. Aegon did not argue. He watched the dragons instead, the way their sleep took them in coils and fits, the way Drogon's nostrils flared when the wind under the door shifted. If we go to the Weeping Town, we should not all go, he said. If we go to Rain House, we should not all go. If we split our strength, we will look like two boys trying on their father's boots. If we move together, we will look like a storm. We will not look like a storm until the wind says so, Arstan said mildly. And John Connington glanced at him sharply, as men do when a stranger speaks an old truth in a room he has not earned and sounds like a man who has earned many. And a storm that arrives at a cliff always has two choices: spend itself and break, or spend the cliff. You have seen both, Dany said, and Arstan inclined his white head. I have, he said, and I have seen men mistake their mood for weather. Queens do it too. You will forgive an old man if he says it to your face, and not behind your back where the words would sour. I will not forgive you if you do it behind my back, Dany said, and the old knight's eyes warmed just a little. Your dragons, Aegon said, and the word your sat there with weight and worry and wonder. Will they fly above us, or will they be seen and make us a fire before we are ready to burn? They will be seen, she said. Being seen is what they are for. But we can choose how and when. She reached to stroke Drogon's jaw. He half woke and made a sound like a tinderbox being opened. The first time men see a dragon, they see a story they were told as children. The second time, they see a weapon. The third time, they see attacks. And the fourth? John Connington asked, bleak humor like a shadow on a snowfield. The fourth, they do not look up, Dany answered. And then you have lost. She rose. I will fly at dusk. From the sea. I will let the Weeping Town see a shadow over the water. I will not breathe on their roofs unless a fool looses an arrow, and I have to teach him manners. Tomorrow we will stand in their market and pay for fish. Then? And after? Aegon's face turned toward her as if he were a sunflower, and she a son he did not yet know whether to trust. After, she said, we will send letters to Estermont, and to Rain House, and to Fellwood, and to the men who stand shivering in the lee of Storm's End, and pretend it is warmer there, because it is the king's. We will ask for bread and wood and news. We will ask who they hate most this week. We will ask what their children sing. We will put chalk on their doors that means something they want it to mean. She smiled without heat. And if the wind is kind, we will visit Tarth. A sapphire island is a polite place to call. Tarth is ruled by Evenfall Hall, John Connington said. Always the ledger, always the sword. The Even Stars have a memory for underdogs. They have already sent little courtesies to the Lannisters. They will claim it is merely common sense. Common sense is a rope men tie around their own ankles when they sleep, Dany said. We will untie it, or cut it. If we must. She looked at Adigan. Send men to the outfarms tonight, quietly, with lists of what we will pay for. Send boys quieter still to listen to what the men say after they leave. Ask the old and the young too. The middle lie to save their lives. The old lie to save their pride. The young lie to see what lies can do. All of them tell you what is hard to buy. He blinked once at the speed of her, and then nodded. A little slow, as if he were trying to keep the rhythm, and would in time. Griff, he said, choose the men. He did not say please. He did not need to. Connington bowed his head a fraction, accepting the authority, and perhaps the boy's attempt at owning it. Dusk fell like velvet thrown from a height and catching on battlements and branches. The sea breathed in long, slow pulls beyond the cliffs. The scent of kelp came up and under it something else. Something like whetstone and iron. Westeros, Dany thought. The smell of men who bury their kings in crypts and call that mercy. She went to the roof with her dragons. Drogon took the edge without ceremony, and then the air. And the air took him and welcomed him. Rhaegal and Victarion went after with little war cries meant for each other more than for the land. Dany climbed the parapet and stood with one foot upon its lip, testing a balance she had learned in a place where the sky had been larger and a horizon further. The drop cut the world in two. The wind pushed at her, curious as a dog. She stepped into it, and it took her. Drogon's back was heat and plate, and a strength that did not care for men's names. She fitted her legs along his spine where his knobs were more familiar to her hands than pearls had ever been. His wings beat once, twice, and the keep fell away with all its rooms, all its troubles, all its men. They went out over the sea first, because she had said it, and because Drogon liked the way waves move as if they mean something by it. Rhaegal kept to her left and a little behind. Victarion darted forward and fanged at invisible fish. Shipbreaker Bay swung open to them, all white teeth and dark tongue. She could see the pattern of currents where colors shifted without arrangement. Men could teach their eyes. She could see, to the south, a headland shaped like a fist. Beyond that something darker bulked. A castle not so much built as compelled to stand. Storm's End, a name that anchors itself where it is set. The sky above it had more wind than elsewhere, a thing Dany could feel in her throat and bones. Her dragons turned their heads in that direction, as a dog does toward a distant scent, and she stroked Drogon's neck and turned him along the coast instead. The weeping town lay at the curve of the bay like a handful of dull coins spilled on a wet table. Smoke from cooking fires lay low. A few boats were drawn up on the shingle like seals that had lost the sea. A bell rang once and stopped, and Dany imagined the man who had pulled its rope had let go when he realized what shadow was passing above him. She took Drogon lower until she could smell the town. Fish, smoke, old beer, cheap soap, piss in alleys, bread, oil. Dogs barked, and then forgot why. Men stepped out from doorways and put hands to brows without thinking, and then took them away and pretended nothing had happened. She did not breathe fire. She let them see black wings and a woman's hair white as the belly of a fish in moonlight, and then turned back to the sea, leaving them to speak to one another with the words men use when they do not know yet whether the world has changed. On the way back, above a stretch of cliff where gorse crouched, and the wind tried to make even stone lie down, an arrow came up at her. It was a good shot, well judged. It did not wobble as boys' arrows wobble. It passed beneath Drogon's left wing and lost speed. Victarion dove on its ghost and snapped it from the air with an insulted hiss. Dany did not mark the face that had loosed it. She held her course and sang out one small syllable. No. Into the wind, and Drogon kept his fire in his throat. Somewhere below, a man was having the worst minute of his life. Realizing that a story he had told in a tavern about a bowman who brought down a dragon was about to end with him very much alive, and no one willing to buy him a drink for it. There would be time enough later to teach or to burn. She chose neither on a first night. When she alit on the roof again, Jorah's face wore the pinched look of a man who has watched something he cannot protect do something it should not and live, this time. One arrow, Dany said, sliding from Drogon's back. There are always 5 you do not see, he said. Then, not able to help himself, you did well. So did the man who did not lose a second, she answered, and Jorah grunted at that wisdom, as if it had come pride from his teeth. Morning brought fish and questions, and a drizzle that tested the honesty of the patching in Griffin's Roost's roof, and found it sufficient, but sulky. They went down to the weeping town with a modest guard, and men who had been brave enough to come out stood with their backs to their doors, and their hands on their hips, the way small folk do to keep from having to touch a sword. Dany bought a basket of shrimp for a coin that would feed the woman who had plucked them for 3 days, if her children did not eat first. Aegon bought onions and did not flinch when the man selling them used his sleeve for a handkerchief. That won him 2 eyes for an afternoon who would tell later about the prince, who did not mind snot on his money. Lemore bought nothing and watched everything. Duck bought a wedge of cheese, sniffed it, and handed it to Belwaz without ceremony. Belwaz ate it as if he were doing the world a favor. A thin man with a book and a quill appeared on the edge of a knot of men and began to write down what everyone was buying and for how much. Dany took his quill and wrote under the columns, "No chalk on the doors of those who sell to us." The thin man squinted at the words as if they might bite. "Who will tell the soft shoes?" he asked. "You," she said, and gave him a second coin and a look he would have to spend as well. By noon, men were practicing how to look as if they had never had chalk or debt or eyes. John Connington returned from Estermont with 3 short answers that said maybe, and perhaps, and we shall see, and 1 long look that said he had seen something he had not wanted to see. Hunger in men who should not be hungry. Fear in those who should not be afraid. They will not choose our side until they are sure it will be the winning side, he said. They are Stormlanders. They have been beaten by their own weather enough to learn that lesson too well. Then we must be weather, Dany said. Or we must change it. The first summons from King's Landing came on the back of a brown horse, whose ears had been chewed by stablemates, and whose rider had the look of a man who had slept in his clothes, and would sleep in them again. He carried a parchment with an untidy lion stamped on wax the color of clotted blood. Jorah read it aloud in the hall, his voice dry. To the traitors styling themselves prince and princess, to the pretenders styling themselves dragon and griffin, to the heads to be taken. Dany stopped him with a palm lifted, and the messenger looked as if he would like very much to become a door. "You are not to blame," she told him. "Eat it before you return. Take a loaf back to your horse. Tell the man who sent you that I will answer when I am asked politely. Then, cow." The man nodded with an expression that contained so much relief, it almost made her laugh. He had never been asked his name by anyone who had not wanted to write it down somewhere, to be found later, and his horse had never tasted bread finer than a winter loaf. He left with both, and a story he would tell in every tavern along the road, until someone with a better sword than his told him to stop. "Say," Jorah said, rubbing his jaw as if it hurt him. "Or the Boy King's men. It reads like a man who has been taught his mother's temper." "And so, let him send more letters," Halden suggested. "Every insult is an advertisement." A day later, a raven came from Tarth fearing dragons and offering courtesy if dragons were left tied up outside like dogs. Arstan smiled his small tight smile at that and said nothing. John Connington rode to Evenfall Hall with Aegon and Lemore and 2 banners and came back with 3 barrels of millet and a long careful speech that had been composed by an Evenstar for whom courtesy was both sword and cloak. "They will not refuse to speak to us," John said. "They will not promise to hear us. They will not choose until they see whether Stannis moves or the Reach does," Aegon said, sullen with the sudden impatience of a man who has only just realized that victory is a season, not a storm. "They will count the banners outside Storm's End every morning and say their prayers to arithmetic. Then give them something to count," Dany said. "Send men to the Rainwood to ask for wood, and send a letter to the castle on Estermont, saying that the Queen of Dragons will dine with them if their kitchens can make a stew fit for a winter they did not expect." "You invite yourself with charming vigor," John Connington said. There was a little grudging admiration buried in the dryness. "I am not asking for their rooms," she said. "Only for a bowl." Her mouth went thin. "I will send also for a man from Dragonstone." There must be one who remembers the taste of our bread. Dragonstone holds for the king, Jorah reminded quietly. Bread burns in common fires, Dany returned. I will not ask to speak to a queen, only to a man. She thought of Stannis Baratheon, with his face like a clenched fist. She had watched a smith once, long ago, beat iron into shape on a small red anvil. The sound had not been much like a song. She could not say whether she would rather meet that man or never meet him at all. News moved around them like the wind, gusts, lulls, scents, false signs of rain. The Golden Company took Fellwood without having to draw blood. Half its garrison had been in the fields when they arrived, and the other half had decided to be in the fields too. A small Lannister host marched east along the Roserad, with much noise and many banners, and then turned south, and stopped to dither in the marches when they discovered their maps had been written by men who had liked wine more than roads. Galleys with black sails were seen off Cape Wrath, and then were not seen, and then were seen again, and men who claimed to know the currents claimed nothing else with confidence. One night, as Dany walked the cliff with Drogon above her, and Irri holding a lantern whose light did nothing to the sky, a man stepped from a cleft in the rock with a knife in his hand, and the odd, liberating certainty of a man who intends to kill a queen and die, and become a better story than he had hoped to be alive. He was quick. Jorah was quicker. Arstan was quickest. The old man moved as if each joint had been oiled with a prayer, and knocked the knife from the would-be murderer's hand with a twist that Dany did not see, and could not later name. The knife went into the gorse, and the man went to his knees with a noise like a sob. "Who sent you?" Jorah demanded, the question rising from some deep well that always gave the same water. "Hunger," the man said, and burst into tears, as if ashamed to own so common a master. "I was told there would be gold." He gulped. "A purse. Not much." "Enough." The Lannister man at the inn. Dany lifted a hand, and Jorah stopped. She could take him to the hall and make him a lesson. She could feed him and make him a rumor. She could have him thrown off the cliff and make him a gap men would walk around for a week and then forget. "What is your wife's name?" she asked. He blinked a few times helplessly and said it, and a little bit of rain went out of the air. "Buy her bread." To the Irri, and to the man. "Tell the Lannister man you never saw me. Tell him there were no dragons. Only geese. Tell him that the queen is a goose." He stared at her, the knowledge that he had not been made into a lesson, a harder lesson than any knife would have taught. He staggered away with his hands held as if they were not his. "You are too merciful," Jorah said low, anger like a flint that will throw sparks even when wet. "I am not," she said. "I am selfish. I cannot use a dead man twice." Arstan's soft cough was almost laughter, almost pain. "There are queens," he said, "who would throw him and be proud of their courage. There are kings who would buy him and be proud of their cunning. There are few who will admit they do not yet know which coin will buy the better tale." He paused. "Your Grace," he added, belatedly, and without irony. It was not all fish and mercy and small knives. A company of men wearing the colors of a marcher lord no longer sure of his allegiance tested them in a long field of broom and stone 2 mornings later, more from the wish to see whether dragons were real than from obedience to any order. Dany mounted Drogon and went up with him, not high but wide. A long, slow, low pass that brought the wind of her brother's name and her father's to their faces, and made their horses want to throw them and run home to comfortable stables, in villages where chalk and debt and cabbage boiled in the same pot. 2 held their ground. She marked their faces because such stubbornness could be purchased later on a different coin. When she did not burn them, when she only let their cloaks twist and snap in her wash, and let Drogon hiss and pour a thin finger of fire along a line of empty stone, half the men laughed, foolish with relief. The other half looked at their captain and waited for permission to breathe. The captain held up his hand like a priest calling down a blessing, and then slowly lowered it into an open palm. "Peace," he was telling himself first, then them. "Peace for 1 more hour." You cannot keep not burning men forever. Jorah warned that night, low and steady, as if the stones themselves should hear. No, Dany said. Forever is a word men should use less. I can keep from it today. She turned her hands to the fire and saw the light in her palms, and thought of cups and men who pour them. She wondered whose hands had held the cup the night her father drank madness, and who had refilled it so many times. Letters came from men with seals in the city, written by men with plumes, telling her there would be peace if she would only go away. Letters came from men with hard hands in the country, telling her there would be bread if she would only stay. A raven from Dragonstone brought colder words yet, written in a hand that did not like ink, from a man who signed Stannis without courtesy, and offered the observation that dragons do not change the law, and that if she wished to be queen, she needed a better claim than fire, and that if she wished to discuss proofs, he would receive her with all the ceremony due to a petitioner. Jorah snorted so hard he almost swallowed a piece of bread. Arstan's mouth went very flat and very thin, until it almost disappeared. Dany laughed to herself and sent a reply that said only, "I will come when I have time," with a small sketch of a lemon in one corner. If Stannis Baratheon had ever smiled, she thought, it would not be over a lemon. He would grit his teeth on the pith and call it virtue. A week into their stay, when the air had dried and the wind had gone around to the north, and the roofs of Griffin's Roost had stopped sulking at rain, Aegon came to her at dawn with a face he had not yet learned to hide. He had news like lightning, and did not know where to put it without burning his own fingers. "Rainhouse has opened its gate," he said. He still remembered to say it as a fact, not a boast, but pride made a light inside his throat. "Good," Dany said, "and let him see the pleasure. We will go and eat their fish and call it blessed, and pay for it twice." "They wish us to," he said, almost laughing. "They wish us to stand on their wall and let ships see us from the sea." "Then stand," she said, "and wave." He nodded, very young, and went. John Connington went with him, and Duck, and a standard that had been folded in a trunk for a generation, and came out smelling of cedar and moth and old prayer. Lemore looked at Dany as if to say something and did not. Halden made lists. Arstan polished his sword with a care that suggested he loved it and did not trust it. Jorah sharpened his own and did not pretend love. Dany rode the cliff with Drogon and watched a sloop beat in against a contrary wind, and admired its stubbornness. "We are not weather yet," she told the dragon. His eye turned to her with its ember in it. "But we might learn," she said. The next raven from the city had a different hand. Tyrion Lannister wrote like a man who expected to be disbelieved, and arranged his sentences like little traps. He did not insult her. He offered a parley and a jest and a list of the ways in which the city could burn without dragons. Jorah wanted to throw the letter into the fire. Dany read it twice and gave it to Arstan. The old man raised his eyebrows very slightly and said, "He has a gift for naming what other men mean to do before they do it. Such men are worth keeping at the far end of any table." "Cersei has him," Jorah said. "Or he has her. I do not know which I like less." "He has a gift for making trouble marry itself," Arstan said. "Less common than you'd think. More dangerous." He returned the letter to Dany with 2 fingers and no advice. She put it away without answer, and felt in her bones that men wrote to her, not because they believed letters could change her, but because writing her name made them feel like bigger men. On the 12th day, a storm came in low and sullen from the east, and set on the cliffs like a dog that would not be moved. It poured for hours, and then, as if bored with being ordinary rain, unpacked thunder. The dragons loved it as they had loved the other storm. They screamed at lightning and chased it and could not catch it, and were happier for the trying. Dany watched from a tower slit, with water running down its throat, and thought of a red door and a lemon tree beating itself against brick in a high wind, and a woman's hands full of glass, holding 2 flames. The pale flame had been a ship once, the dark flame a boy's face. She closed her eyes and saw cups. When the storm broke and ran on, Griffin's Roost shook itself like a wet dog, and steamed in places where old heat had been trapped by damp sieges. Men laughed too loudly, the way they do after thunder. A piper played a reel so badly that Belwas threatened to eat him if he did not stop, and then ate a fig instead to show he was merciful. John Connington returned soaked and satisfied, his beard clotted with rain and triumph. Aegon was with him, hair plastered to his skull, eyes bright as a boy who has stolen an apple and not been caught. Rainhouse had cheered them. Rainhouse had fed them. Rainhouse had asked what tax he meant to set on men who brought in fish when the harbor silted up twice in a year. Aegon had said none. John had said not yet. Dany said later that none was a better word. You will make them love you. John Connington said that night, not happily, as if love were a thing that wore out faster than iron. No, she said, I will make them not hate me. Love can come later if it has nothing better to do. John's mouth moved, a twitch that remembered old songs and did not trust them. You sound like Rhaegar when he had been reading and not riding, he said, and left before she could ask what Rhaegar had sounded like when he had been riding. Men with ghosts make poor dinner companions, Jorah muttered. But he did not say it unkindly. The news from the south began to thicken. Mace Tyrell had drawn his great green host back towards Storm's End to consider it at leisure like a dish he was not sure would please him. Randall Tarley had moved somewhere not everyone expected. Mathis Rowan had sent men who did not know the roads to tell men who had made the roads where the roads were. A ship out of Dorne, light and rakish, and smelling of clean sand, came to a hidden cove 3 miles north, with 3 men under cloaks, who did not uncover their heads until Dany had sat down in a noiseless room and sent the servants away. They were not Martells, but they had Martell patience in their fingers. They brought her a single orange as a gift, and did not wait to be asked before they told her a story about a prince who had died and a sister who had been given a mountain, but had wanted a sky instead. What do the snakes in Sunspear want? Jorah asked when they had gone, more suspicious of oranges than of knives. To see which way the glass will break, Dany said, putting the orange to her nose and smelling salt and sweetness, and a bitterness that would be good in a stew. They will not put their hands out until they are sure the cup is steady. And by then, it may be gone, Arstan murmured. Or broken, Dany agreed. We cannot count on heat from a sun that is setting by its own measure. She set the orange on the table between them, as if it were a small bright world. We can light our own fires. The first true fight she gave Westeros came not in a hall or a harbor, but in a narrow defile where the road bent between 2 shoulders of rock, and men, with Lannister colors on their sleeves, came around the corner, and saw a woman with white hair sitting a gray gelding beside a black dragon, the size of a sumo wrestler, with 2 smaller dragons perched along the broken wall like green and gold gargoyles come to life. For a heartbeat their world forgot to move. Then one had the presence of mind to shout, another to notch, a third to raise a horn. The horn made a flat sound, the kind that makes goats lift their heads. Not yet, Dany told Drogon, and then the man with the horn raised it again, and she said, now. Drogon's fire went not at men but at the horn, a thin ribbon of white gold that struck horn and hand, and made the sound end in a squeal. The horn-bearer dropped his hand, and his hand fell off his wrist. Men panic in many ways. These did not. The captain had drilled them. They fell into a ragged line, and put arrows to string, and some held their arrows, and some loosed, and one dropped his bow altogether, and wept without sound, because he had dreamed of dragons when he was 5, and now the dream had found him. Rhaegal snapped a shaft from the air with a sound like silk tearing. Victarion hissed once, and the line wavered. Dany held Drogon's head with the heat in her palm, and showed him stone. He burned stone. Bits of hot rock flew at men, and broke their ranks without breaking their skin. The captain saw he would lose in a minute, and chose to lose in 20 seconds instead. He threw down his sword, and shouted the word that keeps men alive the longest. Yield? Take their colors, Dany said to Jorah without looking at him. Bind their hands and cut them free in sight of the weeping town. Let the town see that bound men become unbound when they do not try to be heroes for a place that has never loved them. You are sure it will be seen, he asked. It will, she said, and so it was. The thin man with the book wrote it down and told 2 fishwives, who told 6 cousins, who told a peddler, who told a girl, who sold pins, who told a drunk, who told a boy, and the boy went to the cliff, and shouted the news to the sea because the sea never refuses a story. Evenfall sent back a longer letter, written in a hand that had practiced grace into habit. It offered bread and asked for time. Dany sent a loaf from her own table in reply and asked for a room with a view of their harbor. When they did not answer, she sent a sprig of rosemary with her next courier. And the next day, a boy in blue came panting up the path with a formal acceptance tied to his sleeve, in a bow so tight Dany had to cut it with her teeth. She went to Evenfall Hall in a 3-ship convoy with sails reefed against a petulant squall, and found the island as pretty as Som's and twice as defensive. The Evenstar received her in a hall with walls painted the color of the sea when it sleeps, and eyes that had seen Stannis Baratheon's visage grim in the same doorway and Tyrell green in the courtyard, and had not flinched at either. He bowed to her as one bows to weather at a window. "Your Grace," he said, and the title fit her better there than in Illyria's garden. "Lord Tarth," she said. The room smelled of beeswax and salt and meat, stewed long and slow with onions. "Your island is a jewel. It would be a pity to set it on the wrong crown." "Then no." He smiled a small smile. Men keep for jokes that make more sense after a fight. "I am an old man," he said. "Old men live longer when they put their hands in their own pockets and keep them there. But old men also know when to open their doors to a draft and call it fresh air." He glanced, not accidentally, at her dragons, who had arranged themselves on the gallery like decorative sins. "You are a wind men will have to name," he said, "whether they like to or not." "Then name me bread," she returned, "and let your fishermen sell to my men at honest price. I will not take your boats. I will take your stories." "You will get better ones if you pay for them," he said, amused. "We are poor liars on Tarth and poorer thieves." He came closer and lowered his voice as men do when they are about to be brave. "A girl on my island with hair as dark as the sea and eyes like knives remembers a woman who told her that a boy called John was her brother, though he wore different colors. She is halfway to a story and half stuck. If you find a throne to sit, Your Grace, remember the children who want to see their brothers, and do not know if the word means anything." He straightened. "Eat with me," he commanded, and for once she obeyed without pretending it was her idea. By the time she returned to Griffin's Roost, the wind had shifted again, this time in men. Rainhouse had sent a token of men in green and brown with a banner that had been mended by a careful grandmother. Fellwood sent an apology for delay with 3 carts of turnips tied on behind it. The weeping town stopped quite so much weeping and began to sleet instead. The kind of dry cheerfulness men in wet countries cultivate like potatoes. Aegon had grown a circle around himself, in which men moved as if the air had thickened there. He was learning how to be heavy, not merely tall. He no longer looked at her every time someone spoke his name. He looked only when the words attached to it were ropes, and she had to decide whether to cut or pull. And from the city came a rumor that Cersei Lannister had decided all this was Tyrion's fault, had set her lions to devour their own tails, and had asked a Septon to bless a plan with wildfire. Tyrion's name ran down the Roserwad and into the Stormlands and across sailors' benches and up soldiers' sleeves, and everywhere it went. Men argued, which was useful because men do not fight when they are arguing about what other men will do. On the day the sky cleared so completely that men scowled from habit at the brightness and called it unnatural, a rider came in from the north with a cockle shell pinned to his cap and a face burned red by wind. He had been sent from Dragonstone by a guard who had no right to send anyone anywhere, but had. He carried a message scrawled on oiled hide to keep out the rain. It said, "Come if you wish. I will not close my door to you. I do not close my door to truth." It was signed not Stannis, but S. Baratheon, as if the writer had remembered at the last that truth does not require titles to be heavy. Jorah wanted to throw that into the fire too. Dany did not. She put it under a lamp and watched the oil sweat through the letters, and wondered how men like Stannis thought about fire and law, and whether either had ever warmed him. Not yet. She said aloud. To the old rock in the sea that had made her father think himself safe. Not until my house is a house. Drogon flicked his tongue out and tasted the word house, and liked it. At night she dreamed of a hall with a chair at one end that was not a chair, and a shadow of a boy whose hair turned gold, only when fire struck it. In the dream, she gave him a lemon. He held it with both hands, reverent and confounded, as if it were a relic and an apple and a crown all at once. "What do I do with it?" he asked, and she laughed and said, "He ate it, and he bit and made a face and swallowed, and then laughed too." When she woke, she could taste the bitterness at the back of her tongue and found it good. The day after that, men came in out of the rainwood with boar on poles and told a story about a brotherhood without banners that had stopped them on the road, and had not robbed them, and had asked questions with an old courtesy. Dany listened, hungry for those men as for wild apples, and asked her own questions. Some men in Westeros still judged kings by how they held to promises they'd made years ago when they had had more bread and fewer graves. She filed the names away, a different chalk. That evening, she stood again on the parapet with the sea as her confessor and the wind in her hair making a crown she could not take off. Aegon came up and stood beside her without speaking. He had learned to be quiet in good places. The sun bled itself out into the water with a thrift that said there would be more tomorrow. "You were right," he said at last. It was not grudging. It was interest paid, not principle. "If I had gone further, if I had tried to take too much too fast, I would have had less. You are learning to count." She said, and he snorted. "I could always count," he said. "I am learning to count the right things." "What are they?" she asked. "Time," he said after a moment. "Bread, pride. How many times a man will forgive you for making him look small? How many times he will forgive you for making him look big and feel small?" He looked out over the water, and his mouth tightened. "Also, how many arrows fit in a quiver?" "Good," she said. "One day you will count cups." "I already do," he said. "I count who pours. Illyrio is not here, but he pours. He always does." She said. A gull went by low and sullen, and then, having doubted its own judgment, came back and flew higher. "So will you." "So will I." He looked at her with the expression he wore when he had almost decided to ask a question, and then was almost a man, and did not. He asked it anyway. "When do we go to King's Landing?" "When the city asks," she said, and he made a face as if she had put salt on his lemon. "It will ask," she told him. "Cities always ask. They are beasts that want to be fed. They will call it a parley and think they mean to trick us. We will come when the price of bread in Flea Bottom is something no letter can lower." "Ah. And if we wait too long?" he asked. "We will not," she said. "Men cannot keep cups full forever. They drink even when they pretend to pour." He smiled then, tired and pleased by the shape of a future he could not yet touch. "You speak in riddles," he accused. "I speak in kitchens," she said. "You were reared in tents. We will both have to learn halls." They stood together until the light was a memory, and the wind did not need them. Below, the keep breathed like a beast at ease. Beyond, the sea went about its business, and did not care who named it. In the dark under her hand, Drogon's scales felt like a map. Bumps and lines, ridges and plains, all leading somewhere she had not yet gone. She would go, when her house traveled with her and did not blow apart like a badly tied roof in a sudden squall. She would go when the lemons were ripe, and the chalk was hers, and the boy could carry his own cup without spilling. She would go when the city asked with its stomach, not its lips. She would go when the storm and the house learned each the other's name and found out that, together, they were weather.